So glad that you're here. So glad you're here. Late night conversation. I'm sitting here. I'm in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. Not in the living room where the magical bookshelf is, but I am here in the bedroom, and I'm talking to all of you, and it's awesome. So glad you're all here. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and be absolutely sure to just crush the notifications bell. Just crush that notifications bell because people are not getting notified. And if you're not getting notified, you might not know that we're doing this thing here. So be sure to crush the notifications bell. Should be a fun hangout tonight. Sometimes I get on here and I give very wild, prepared speeches. But a lot of times, I just like to get on here and just chill with all of you. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give opening remarks like I always do, give you some insights, talk about some things that recently happened, and some insights, maybe read to you a little bit. But then from there, I'll just answer your questions. And we'll just do this until the questions run out. That's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. It is going to be a lot of fun. I just want to relax and have fun with you all. We have our unique perspective. We are Marxists and dialectical materialists and socialists and anti-imperialists. We are part of the city building tendency. We say out of the movement and to the masses. We say we need a government of action that will fight for working families. But we are good folks, and we're having a great time. And I value deeply all of you. I value deeply all of you, and you all have a great time, and we're here, and so I just want to hang out with folks. We say Fusion City now. We say all kinds of stuff. So glad you all are here. I just want to spend time with my community, enjoy you, and just kind of chill with you all. I've got plenty of unnamed water beverage in case my throat gives out. And yeah, that's what we're doing tonight. So, like as usual, I'll do my opening remarks. I'll be writing your super chat questions down, mind you. I'll be writing the super chat questions down right here. So if you have a super chat, I will have an answer. Won't necessarily be the answer that you want, but I will give you an answer of some type. That's how we roll. So, as the super chats come in, I'll write them down. I answer them in the second half of the show. That's how we do it here. In the second half of the show, I answer your super chats. Ooh, good question. Agribusiness and U.S. imperialism. Very good question. Agribusiness, U.S. imperialism. We can definitely talk about that. Oh, shout out to Peter Coffin, who's here. He had a great stream earlier, the third part in a stream that Peter Coffin and Miss Astronaut Cowboy did about socialism, utopian and scientific. The very important book by Frederick Engels. I caught some of their stream earlier tonight. You should really check out Peter Coffin. Peter Coffin and Miss Astronaut Cowboy, they do great stuff. So it was a great stream that was happening earlier. So yeah, I guess we're just gonna jump right into it. I'm going to give my opening remarks, and then from there we'll do the roll call, and from there I'll answer your questions. Before we do that, if anyone wants to tweet this out, now is the time to tweet this out. If anyone wants to post this on your Facebook, now is the time to post this on your Facebook. If you want to post this on Instagram, now is the time to post this on Instagram. If you want to post it on Reddit, now is the time to post it on Reddit. If you want to post it on some app of which I am unfamiliar, some app that I do not know about, go ahead. Make it a bigger audience. Let's have fun. The more the merrier. It's Saturday night. Plenty of unnamed water beverage. And does the prevalence of narcissism in Western culture combined with the destruction of the community make it the hardest place for socialism? All right. Narcissism. Harm. Destruction. West. Too hard for socialism. All right. Wrote it down. All right. So I wanted to just start out by talking about today, because today was an interesting day, right? Today is Saturday. I don't generally work on Saturdays unless there is breaking news. If there's breaking news or something, I might get called in to work. But for the most part, Saturdays is, it's a weekend. It's a day that I'm not working. So, it is the first Saturday of September. I'm in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. And I started the day. I got up, drank some unnamed diet beverage, listened to some Beethoven, as I always do. Woke up and went into the city. And I went to Union Square in Manhattan because there was a demonstration happening in Union Square against the bombing of Yemen and against Saudi Arabia's bombing of Yemen. And I didn't actually participate in that demonstration, but I knew there was somebody who was one of you, someone from the audience, who, wanted to meet with me. And so me and two of the John Brown volunteers, shout out to you, John Brown volunteers. They're on the streets every day doing outreach and canvassing and promoting socialism. So me and two of the John Brown volunteers, we met with a fellow, an older gentleman, I would say. I mean, he's getting up there toward retirement, an older gentleman who's a fan of this program. And I always, I found this to be a particularly interesting conversation because I'm not going to say much, about it specifically, but he's a fan of these broadcasts. He watches these streams, and he lives somewhere around here, and he had been in a socialist group years ago. That is a socialist group I don't know that much about. I had read this socialist group's literature, but I didn't know much about the internal life, and so we sat there in the Taco Bell, right? Sat there in the Taco Bell, and we sat there in Taco Bell. And we sat there in the Taco Bell, and we listened to this fellow, and he shared his experiences. He talked about what it had been like to be an active socialist, an active Trotskyist, I guess you could say, back in the 1990s. And we engaged and we listened to him, and it was an interesting conversation. And I'm really glad, and I really love meeting you all, by the way. I must say, meeting people from our little community is really special when I get to meet any of you. And so I got to sit there in the Taco Bell, and we got to, talk to this guy who had been kind of an active Trotskyist back in the 90s, and he told us about some of his experiences, and it was interesting to hear it. And what was interesting was, while our political differences certainly came across, I mean, I'm not a Trotskyist, we disagreed on some things, the more than that are similarities. Why are you asking me stuff like that? I mean, I'll, okay, all right. But anyway, so we're sitting there, and and we talked to the guy, and we got to kind of hear his perspective on what it was like to be a socialist activist for a while. And what came across was just kind of, as much as many of us in the socialist movement come from different perspectives and such, there's a lot of things that bring us together. There's a lot of similarities, I guess. So that was interesting. So, I went out with the John Brown volunteers. We did some street outreach, Union Square area, Washington Square Park area. And we did some outreach, and and it's a skill, by the way, being able to talk to random people on the street about socialism who you've never met before, approaching random people with literature and such. It's not an easy thing to do. And I'm talking to some of these John Brown volunteers about it, and they're saying, how do you do this? I said it comes from experience. I said, you just have to do it. The more you do it, the better you will get at it, right? And I'm reassuring them, like, they're like, oh, looks so easy when you do it. You can talk to somebody, it's easier, right? Street outreach is an acquired skill. You just have to do it, right? The more you do it, the better it is. You get at it. And it's just, you learn by doing. So I did some outreach with them. All right, great reset. All right. Did some outreach with them, right? Great reset. did some outreach with them. But then I had to, we had our weekly Zoom call for the Center for Political Innovation, and I had some other tasks I had to take care of. So I went up to my office. I'm at my office. I get on our weekly Zoom call for the John Brown Volunteer, or for the Center for Political Innovation, talk to the folks out in California, the folks in Chicago, the folks in Texas. We have this weekly Zoom call where we talk about the Center for Political Innovation and how we're going to move ahead. Very important, and it's really great, the folks who can get on there every week and engage with us. It's a really great thing to do. So we have our weekly Zoom. So we do our Zoom call, and then I had a couple other things I had to take care of. I had some articles and some other stuff I had to do. And so, I'm getting ready to leave my office and head on home. My phone rings. And it's, it's one of the John Brown volunteers is on the phone. And he's talking to me, and he's like, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know." And I guess I'm not going to quote him specifically, but this is what he told me. Right? He told me, he said, okay, so I guess they were doing their canvassing and their outreach in the streets of Manhattan, promoting the Center for Political Innovation, the city building tendency, and etc. And he said that, at one point they were walking down the street and they encountered people from the Internationalist group, which is a little tiny Trotskyist group that's here in New York City, selling their paper. And it was only $1. He bought their newspaper. What could I tell him about the Internationalist group? I said, well, it's this little tiny Trotskyist group here in New York City, blah, blah, blah. And he said that a little later, they were walking down the street, and they ran into two women who were just coming from a protest that had just happened against the new anti-abortion laws in Texas. And of course, these young women were coming from this protest, against, the anti-abortion laws of Texas. And of course, they're carrying signs from their political organization. And what political organization is it? It's the New York City Revolution Club, the Revolutionary Communist Party. So the Internationalist group and the Revolutionary Communist Party. And just to top it all off, as they're heading to the subway, they passed a demonstration, a small demonstration, from the Workers' World Party. They had set up the Workers' World Party. And I thought, my goodness, this only in New York City, right? So this is the first weekend of September, the first Saturday of September. And, you wake up, you go, and there's a protest around Yemen. And then you talk to, an older comrade who tells you about his activism as a Trotskyist in the 90s. And then you go out and, you do your own political outreach and your canvassing. And then you encounter people from a Trotskyist group. And then you encounter people from a Maoist group. And then you encounter people from whatever the Workers' World Party is, confused ex-Trotskyists who, whatever. And this is so weird. It is so weird, right? Manhattan is not a very big place. It's a very small island, but there's a lot of people doing communism in Manhattan, especially right now. It's interesting to think about. Media freak out over Biden withdrawal, right? It's interesting to think about. And it's starting to get dark here. It's starting to get a little bit colder here. It feels like autumn all of a sudden. We had that autumn shift. It's not summertime anymore. It's not summertime anymore, but you walk around the city, and people are doing communism. They're doing communism. We've got the Center for Political Innovation. We're doing our thing. We have our John Brown volunteer outreach team, but there's also people from this group, and there's people from that group, and there's people from this other group, and it really makes you think. We are in kind of a different period, because in the 1990s, you could very well have walked through Manhattan on the first, Saturday of September and not seen anybody doing anything communist. And I think when I first moved to this city, you could have easily walked through this city and, and on a Saturday afternoon, walked around Washington Square Park and Union Square area, never seen anybody do anything communist. But, right, should I, MLs who, okay, yeah, who, and it's interesting because it's like there's a widespread interest in communism now. There's a widespread interest in communism. in the culture, and there's a lot of younger folks who want to get politically involved. And right now there's that whole the whole Jimmy Dore debacle, and it's weird because the Jimmy Dore debacle, it like takes a new twist and turn every single day, right? So it started out with, I think, with force the vote, if I'm not mistaken, right? It started out that Biden won the election. There's a pandemic going on, and so it's showing that the CPI and John Brown volunteers are effective. Sounds like other groups are very worried. Well, thank you, David Fox. Thank you very much. And you know, in left-wing circles in the United States, we're having the whole Jimmy Dore debacle, and it started out that Jimmy Dore, Jimmy Dore was, he's this comedian, anti-imperialist, formerly from Young Turks, has his own YouTube show. And he said that they should force the vote around Medicare for all. They should force the vote. They should have a vote on Medicare for all and bring it to a vote and see who's for it and who's against it. And for raising this and for calling out AOC and the squad for not pushing for Medicare for all and not seizing the moment. Because of that, Jimmy Dore, has been just castigated for saying, hey, now that the Democrats have all these seats in Congress, and now that they should force Nancy Pelosi to bring Medicare for all to a vote, force the vote. Of course, Jimmy Dore said this, and you would think that people would go, "Oh, okay, that's a great idea." Maybe they would agree, maybe they would disagree, but no. I mean, there's a whole bunch of the mainstream left, the labor bureaucracy, the people that are supporters of the Democratic Party mainstream, and the kind of the folks that were for, all right, the folks that were for Bernie, but then once Bernie Sanders was out of the race, they suddenly were urging everyone to vote for Biden, or else, you're supporting fascism. And a lot of the more mainstream voices in the Bernie Sanders movement turned against Jimmy Dore and said, how dare he, demand force the vote. So that was one aspect of it. But then Aaron Mate comes into it. Now, Aaron Mate, I've met Aaron Mate before, a couple times. He's a journalist, and he's gone to Syria, and he has picked apart some of the allegations against the Syrian government. He's picked apart some of the allegations. He's shown that, and it's not just him. Right? I mean, there are people from the chemical inspection team that have come forward and said they don't believe, the allegations being made against the Syrian government. And there are all kinds of things. I mean, if you follow what's going on at the UN and the allegations against the Syrian government, there's a lot of things that we're being told, it's being repeated to us as fact, that we should hate the Syrian government and that they are mass murderers using chemical weapons. Well, there's more to the story, okay? And there's issues there, and, fine. I'm not going to get into that whole debate on here, but, Aaron Mate is a journalist who has picked apart some of the pro-imperialist narrative around Syria. And so he had a spat with Anna Kasparian, one of the hosts of the Young Turks, and she basically called him an apologist for dictators, and she's come at him and just, brought it down on him and attacked Aaron Mate. How dare he support the Syrian government? And so there's been this whole hubbub. And of course, all the people that are supporting Jimmy Dore are also supporting Aaron Mate, and all the people that are hating Jimmy Dore are also hating Aaron Mate, right? And so then, it twists in another direction, right? It twists in yet another direction. Which is that Chelsea Manning, who is, a hero in many, many ways. I mean, for exposing U.S. war crimes, going to jail for daring to expose horrendous atrocities, a whistleblower. Chelsea Manning has come out now against Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald is the reporter who published a lot of what WikiLeaks has revealed. And so Chelsea Manning and Glenn Greenwald are now fighting with each other. Chelsea Manning and Glenn Greenwald are fighting with each other at this point. And so, not surprisingly, the young folks that support the Young Turks, folks that oppose Jimmy Dore, are opposing Chelsea Manning, and folks that support Jimmy Dore and folks that support Aaron Mate are supporting Glenn Greenwald. And, I'm watching all of this play out, and it's weird. And it's like it's person after person after person. But it's this division, and what seems to be really happening here is we're at the point where it's almost like, are we really going to have a left wing in U.S. politics or not? Jimmy Dore is not a communist. That's okay. He's an anti-imperialist. He's an advocate of social justice, and I would even probably call him a socialist. But he's not a Marxist or an advocate of a state-run economy. He's a good guy. He's a progressive, but he really believes in being a progressive, right? Aaron Mate is just a journalist who's, honest and not afraid to expose some of the lies of imperialism. Glenn Greenwald, again, definitely not a communist. Says things that I don't agree with about a lot of issues, but is critical of the war makers and imperialism. And it's like we keep having these debates where if you are part of the liberal order, you go on one side. And if you are part of genuinely believing in anti-imperialism and Marxism and class struggle, you go on the other. And there's a shrill tone, a very shrill tone that these people that attack Aaron Mate, that attack Jimmy Dore, that attack Glenn Greenwald take. Somehow, OWS 10th anniversary, right? Somehow, they equate Jimmy Dore and Aaron Mate and Glenn Greenwald with being Nazis. I don't know how they make that leap, but that's what they think. Big issues debate within communism, right? Biggest debates within. That seems to be the issue, right? Is that, they say you must be a Nazi. Whereas Jimmy Dore, Aaron Mate, Glenn Greenwald, they don't feel any particular loyalty to the liberal side of the establishment. That's very clear. They don't care, right? If conservatives are going to impeach Joe Biden, they don't care. They sit there and they're like, well, Joe Biden's a warmonger. He's not our president. I mean, who cares, right? The people that are the centrists, I guess you could call them, the division is, do you feel any loyalty? What it really gets down to is, do you feel any loyalty to the DNC, to the Democratic Party, to the liberal order? Do you feel any loyalty to them or not? Do you feel an obligation to protect the liberal order from conservatives? And also, do you feel a desire to win over conservatives to socialism or not? Do you have that desire? Or not? That is the question, right? It's pretty clear, Jimmy Dore is happy to have the Bugaloo Boy libertarian, on his show. He's happy to do that. And on top of that, Aaron Mate is questioning war, and Glenn Greenwald has been willing to appear on Fox News and reach out to conservatives. And it seems like on the left, the question now really is, do we have any attachment to the liberal order or not? That's the division that's really going on, and it is tearing apart left-wing circles because some forces in the left-wing movement really are attached to the liberal order, and some forces are not. I'm just writing down the super chats as they're coming in. Yeah, right. I know. Crackdown. Fan of your work. Be in Manhattan next weekend. All right. Very good. Send me an email, calebmaupin@gmail.com. That's how you reach me. Send me an email, Tashar. Send me an email, calebmaupin@gmail.com. That's how the best way to reach me. And that was for anybody, too. If you want to contact me, that's the way to reach me, is through my Gmail, calebmaupin@gmail.com. No periods or spaces or anything. But anyhow, so I'm sitting here, and it's like, this is really the division. Right? pejorative use of internationalist. Just writing down the super chats as they come in. That seems to be the division. Do you have any loyalty to the liberal order? Do you feel a need to defend the liberal order? Or do you feel that the liberal order is just your enemy, is just part of the problem? And do you have a desire to oppose the liberal order? And I think folks who watch me know where I stand. I am opposed to the liberal order. I am opposed to the liberal order. I don't side with the right, but I want to recruit the people that have been drawn to the right as a way of opposing the liberal order. I think that there are many people that see the problems with the liberal order, and they see the only real force of opposition as being the right, and they go to the right. And that the job of the left is not to defend the liberal order, but rather to go to these people who oppose the liberal order and give them a socialist and leftist way of opposing the liberal order, as opposed to the right. And if the left concedes opposition to the liberal order, if it hands over opposition to the liberal order to the right wing, if it makes it so the left are just defenders of the status quo, if that's what happens, if leftism just becomes defense of the liberal order, the right inevitably will win, because the liberal order is doomed, and that it's doomed for all the reasons that we Marxists are very well informed about. And that seems to be the divide, that there is one section of the left-wing voices out there that are adamant that our job is to defend the liberal order, and there is one section out there that says, no, our job is not to defend the liberal order. In fact, our job is to attack the liberal order from the left and recruit people who oppose the liberal order to a Marxist and socialist message. That is the divide. And that is what you need to understand behind all these debates. Aaron Mate, Anna Kasparian, Glenn Greenwald, Chelsea Manning, Jimmy Dore. This is the debate. This is the debate. Are we as socialists defenders of the liberal order from the right, or are we opponents of the liberal order who seek to hijack opposition to the liberal order, and move it in a left-wing direction? Should we be talking to the liberal order's opponents and trying to recruit them, or should we be rallying support for the liberal order and trying to push the liberal order in a more liberally socialisty way? What is the best strategy? Should we be trying to rally around the liberal order? Should we be defending Joe Biden right now and rallying to support Joe Biden? Ethiopia, Eritrea. Should we be doing that? Or should we be going to the people who oppose Joe Biden and are calling Joe Biden a communist and saying, well, you're right to oppose Joe Biden, but he's not a communist. He's not a communist. Joe Biden is a defender of U.S. imperialism and capitalism, and all the stuff you're mad about, the wars, the poverty, the rising police state, all of that is caused by capitalism, and socialism is the answer. That is really the question of what we should be doing, and that points toward the past, right? In the past, there was a time, you'll have to remember, the Communist Party of the United States, during the Great Depression, they did both of these things at different times, right? During the early 1930s, the Communist Party, they made a point of opposing social democracy, defending the Soviet Union, and building up, a communist movement, right? They had the slogan, the United Front from Below, a revolutionary way out of the crisis, and they built their own organization. They defended the Soviet Union, they condemned social democracy, they called social democrats social fascists. They did that during the early 1930s. That's how they built the unemployment councils, and that's how they did the great strike in San Francisco in 1934, was by opposing the liberal order. They called FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a social fascist, and they fought the liberal order in order to build up a base of communist opposition. But then, in the late 1930s, the Communist Party built the Popular Front, and they aligned with Roosevelt against fascism. So the question really, the crux of the question, Occupy Wall Street originally stood up to the liberal order but got hijacked. All right, OWS, hijacked by liberal order. So really the question gets down to, are we facing the threat of fascism right now? And would it be necessary to build an anti-fascist united front at this time? Well, here's the first thing you have to remember. When you enter a united front, if you don't have anything to offer, you just basically, that's just disillusion, right? When the Communist Party entered a united front with Roosevelt and the Democrats against fascism, they had huge organizations. They had millions of people. They had labor unions they controlled. They had unemployment councils. They had influence over a huge section of society. And internationally, the Soviet Union was 1/5 of the planet. 1/5 of the planet was under the control of communists. So for them to enter that alliance, it was a relationship where both sides had to give something. Yes, the communists had to rally in support of Roosevelt, and they did a lot to support Roosevelt. But Roosevelt also legalized labor unions. Roosevelt also, he created unemployment insurance. Roosevelt did a lot, to reconcile and give them support. It went both ways. But if you don't have anything, if the Communist Party of the United States had 10 members, what good would it have been? What good would it have been to enter that popular front? Meanwhile, the question is Donald Trump a fascist? And I don't think Donald Trump was a fascist. I think that he may have had fascists who supported him, but overall, Donald Trump was a liberal. All right, IWW organizing workplaces. I mean, Donald Trump had fascist rhetoric in some cases. I mean, he quoted Mussolini and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, his policies were, free market policies. His policies were, taking us to the brink of World War III, with Iran. And I mean, Trump, he had neoliberal economics rather than fascist Bonapartism. And he continued U.S. foreign policy as is. I don't see fascism with Trump. I see bigotry a little more blatantly. I see some anti-globalist rhetoric and some right-wing populism a little more explicitly than we've seen in a long time. I'm not seeing fascism, right? I mean, if Donald Trump was a fascist, you wouldn't be able to get on TV and call Donald Trump a fascist, right? I mean, fascism is a mass mobilization of violence and terror to stabilize capitalism. Nazi Germany, everybody knew when Nazi Germany came in, they were living under something intense. Everybody knew when Mussolini came in. Everybody knew when Pinochet came in. Donald Trump got elected, implemented a lot of bad, shitty policies, and then he got voted out of office, and he had his supporters riot and tear up some stuff on Capitol Hill. And yes, Donald Trump is a demagogue, and you can see elements of potential Bonapartism there. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump, at the end of the day, he didn't really undo or challenge the liberal order very much, number one. And number two, he didn't want to. I mean, Donald Trump wasn't a fascist really at all. He was a right-wing kind of populist president who shared a lot in common with the liberal order, but also had his own agenda. He was a politician who didn't play by the rules as much as other politicians do. That's a good way of putting what Donald Trump was. Donald Trump was a politician who didn't play by the rules in the same way that most politicians do. They have kind of a gentlemanly agreement among them, the rich and the politicians, right? Ronald Reagan used to say, we're all friends after 6. They have this gentlemanly agreement. We don't, punch below the belt. All right, gentlemen, we shall have a fight, but there shall be no punching below the belt. No punching below the belt. And there will be no ear pulling. We don't pull on people's ears here. This is a fine boxing match, right? That's how the ruling class do it. And Donald Trump came in and he said, no, I'm going to hit below the belt, right? I'm going to bring my supporters into Capitol Hill to tear some shit up and act crazy on Capitol Hill. And, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to... I am going to push some buttons around anti-immigrant bigotry and racism that are not normal. I'm going to try to build up ICE to be like a policing agency. That's Immigration Customs Enforcement. That's a little more loyal to me. I'm going to fight dirty a little bit. Right? And for that, he was widely hated by the establishment because, again, they're used to playing by certain rules, and Donald Trump broke those rules to serve his own ends, his own selfish ends. You know, the response, of course, right? If liberals really wanted to defeat Donald Trump, if Biden and all of them really wanted to defeat Donald Trump, they should break the rules from the left, right? And they should encourage left-wing anti-imperialist demonstrations. And they should embrace China. That's what Roosevelt did. Roosevelt was facing the threat of a military coup. They were talking about really breaking the rules and having a military coup against him. And Roosevelt got backed into a situation where he said, okay, you're breaking the rules. You're plotting a military coup against me. Okay, I'll break the rules against you, and I'm going to sit down with the Communist Party, and I'm going to recognize the Soviet Union, and I'm going to create the Works Progress Administration and hire the unemployed, and I'm going to create Social Security, and Roosevelt, he also broke the rules, right? Well, Biden's not breaking the rules. Why should he, right? I mean, what threat is there on Biden if he doesn't break the rules, right? So Donald Trump was a right-wing maverick, Bonapartist, demagogue politician who broke the rules from the right, I guess, if you want to call it that, in order to serve his own agenda. And he's been defeated, and the liberal establishment has defeated him. And now we are being told that it is a crime for those of us who are Marxists and leftists to go to a lot of the working class people who supported Donald Trump and say to them, hey, Donald Trump, he appealed to your anger against the liberal order. And it's good to be angry at the liberal order. The liberal order is bad in many, many ways. But Donald Trump isn't the answer. The answer is socialism. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We are being told that is a crime. Jimmy Dore knows that that's what must be done. Glenn Greenwald knows that that is what must be done. Aaron Mate knows that that is what must be done. Max Blumenthal knows that that must be done. These people aren't communists. But they realize that if you genuinely believe in left-wing progressive values, if you're just a genuine, honest social democrat, if you're just a genuine, honest anti-imperialist, this is what you believe. Legacy of Lenin, right? Lenin, this is Stalin in modern Russia. This is what you would do, right? This is what you would do. And it's pretty clear that a lot of the people that are putting out a kind of socialist-sounding message on social media, they don't genuinely believe in these liberal values. They don't really want to fight for these liberal values. They know that it gets them clicks, and they know that it's a way of rallying support around Biden. But at the end of the day, they don't really believe in this stuff. They don't want to fight for these things. They don't want to force the vote, right? They don't want to really oppose these wars and challenge the lies that are used to create these wars. And that's really what's going on here. And that's how you can understand all this drama, because it gets all confusing. Nazbol, centrist, radlib. What's going on here? Well, I'm trying to tell you what's going on. And for those of you, a couple things I wanted to just get to, right? Because we talk about different books on here. And there's a couple books that I just keep getting back to, right? One of those books is called The Future is Up to Us by Nelson Puri. A revolutionary talking politics with the American people. This book is so important. Nelson Puri is an amazing, amazing communist leader. And I have learned so much from his writing. And this very short book, which you can read, the whole thing is online, by the way. You don't have to buy it. You don't have to get a print edition of it. But you can. The whole PDF is online. It's widely available. This book is really important. If earlier tonight, Peter Coffin and Miss Astronaut Cowboy, they were talking about, what Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Frederick Engels, and, capitalism and the natural crisis, prosperity, poverty amid plenty, etc. Well, this book, published in 2004, this book explains all of that in the context of the computer revolution. And it is very, very, very important. And it's from a lifelong African-American communist activist, Nelson Puri, a guy who spent his life, fighting for these ideals, teaching Marxism, and also, building organizations that help homeless people and stuff. And it's really important. I'm going to read you just the first, opening page here. I'm going to read to you what he said, right? This is just the opening of it. He said, I had finished an interview on Good Day Atlanta, a popular morning show. From there, I went to Underground Atlanta, the old WB. Okay, hold on. I'm going to write down the super chat. W.E.B. Du Bois books by W.E.B. Du Bois and Foster. All right. He says, I had finished an interview on Good Day Atlanta, a popular show. From there, I went to Underground Atlanta, the old railroad station that's been converted into a popular eating and shopping center. I had no more started eating my lunch when the waiter said to me, Hey, I know you. I saw you on TV. I thought what you were saying was right on, man. Then I noticed a white guy standing just to the side of me, very patiently waiting for me to notice him. Southerners are polite. I stood up and invited him to please sit down. He declined, saying his family was waiting for him. Then he went on to say that he had seen the interview. He said, I'm from Vicksburg, Mississippi, and there's no way for me to be a communist. But then he said, I'm not going to agree with you, but at the same time, I want to tell you that this was the only sensible resolution of this problem that I've heard so far, and we'd better resolve this problem soon. We all agreed on what the problem is. Something must be done to guarantee people at least a minimal means of survival. I thought he summarized the attitude of a large number of people who, for ideological reasons, are not prepared to either accept communism but understand there is no other way. Either the method of distribution is changed to guarantee the necessities of life to those without employment, or we will have to coexist with a growing number of bodies in the streets. In the winter of 1998 in Chicago, there were 40 to 50 bodies a month found alongside the roads in the shelters. The numbers are growing, and either we deal with it or we will reach epidemic proportions. Wow, if only he could see what things were like today. Reaganomics introduced a level of selfishness hitherto unknown in our country. As bad as the ideological and moral situation has become, there is still a fundamental morality among human beings that simply cannot tolerate the wholesale destruction of human life. The American people will rise to their historic tasks. That's Nelson Peary. That's how he starts his book, The Future is Up to Us. And he's basically saying that, look, all across this country, and he's writing this in 2004, before the financial crisis, before the meltdown. This is 2001, I'm sorry. This is 2001, right? Before the financial crisis, before the meltdown, before the pandemic, before any of this. He's writing about this, and he's saying, and in this book, he explains it all. He explains what a revolution is. He explains the nature of the computer revolution, the problem of overproduction, the emergence of what he calls the new class of people that are permanently unemployed. And I mean, this is really, really gold stuff. If you want to understand a Marxist approach to the crisis, you got to get your hands on this. And if you want to know, who he is, if you want to know who he was, I also recommend his autobiography, Black Radical. All right, this tells you who Nelson Peary was. Nelson Peary, he was very much a communist, lifelong activist. And this autobiography of his, he wrote, it's the second part of his autobiography, tells of how he came home from World War II and joined the Communist Party USA. And it's really, really good stuff. And I mean, he talks about, fighting for civil rights in the 1950s. He talks about FBI infiltration of the Communist Party. He talks about starting the Maoist movement. He talks about, the 1960s and the rebellions in Watts, California. I mean, this is some really good stuff. So I just wanted to highlight Nelson Peary's work. And then I because it relates so much to what we've been talking about on here, right? I just wanted to hold up the BreadTube book once again. BreadTube Serves Imperialism. This book is about so much more than just BreadTube. I used BreadTube to make a point, but it's about so much more than BreadTube. And I'm going to read to you the conclusion of the BreadTube book, because really the conclusion, right? the final section of the BreadTube book, before I get to the appendix, the conclusion of the BreadTube book really gets at exactly everything I've been talking about on here. So this is page 157 of the BreadTube book, and that's how I'll end my opening remarks. So I just want to read to you. I want to read to you my analysis of what's going on right now, and who are BreadTube, and who are what's going on. Louis Bonaparte's regime that seized control of France in 1851 did not work to bring the working class to power. Its aim was to stabilize French capitalism on behalf of one section of the capitalist class. Karl Marx described the coalition the military dictator built for himself. Marx wrote, "On the pretext of founding a benevolent society, the lumpen proletariat of Paris has been organized into secret sections, each of them led by Bonapartist agents, with a Bonapartist general at the head of the whole. Alongside decayed roués with dubious means of subsistence and dubious origin, alongside ruined and adventurous offshoots of the bourgeoisie, were vagabonds, discharged soldiers, discharged jailbirds, escaped galley slaves, swindlers, mountebanks, lazzaroni, pickpockets, tricksters, gamblers, pimps, brothel keepers, porters, literati, organ grinders, rag pickers, knife grinders, tinkers, beggars, in short, the whole indefinite disintegrated mass thrown hither and thither, which the French call la bohème. From this kindred element, Bonaparte formed the Society of December 10th, a benevolent society insofar, like Bonaparte, all of its members, UBI, right? Write it down. All of its members, a benevolent society insofar as, like Bonaparte, all of its members felt the need of benefiting themselves at the expense of the laboring nation. UBI. This Bonaparte, who constitutes himself chief of the lumpen proletariat, who here alone rediscovers in mass, forms the interests which he personally pursues, who recognizes in this scum, offal, refuse of all classes, the only class upon which he can base himself unconditionally, is the real Bonaparte. An old crafty roué, he conceives the historical life of nations and their performances of state as comedy, in the most vulgar sense, as a masquerade in which the grand costumes, words, and postures merely serve to mask the pettiest knavery. This passage from Marx, containing plenty of outdated and unfamiliar terminology, is essential to understanding BreadTube. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines roués as men devoted to a life of sensual pleasure. Literati are well-educated people interested in literature. Mountebanks refers to persons who deceive others in order to trick them out of their money. Lazzaroni is an Italian term referring to the desperately poor organized into gangs, often described as street people under a chief. When Marx describes the whole indefinite disintegrated mass thrown hither and thither, which the French call la bohème, it can be easily understood that what he is describing is counterculture, bohemian elements. Marx describes this counter-gang amassed by Louis Bonaparte as benefiting themselves at the expense of the laboring nation. This lumpen proletariat, according to Marx, is separate from those who lay the basis of the communist revolution. The proletariat, the class with nothing to lose but their chains and the world to win, who sit at the center of the Marxist narrative of world history, are not organ grinders, pickpockets, and literati. Rather, they are the broad masses, the working class. The real proletariat are the millions and millions of people who spend their days working in order to pay their bills, feed their children, and hopefully retire in old age. The proletariat are not grifters leeching wealth from society around them, but rather the class that produces the wealth with their labor power. When looking over BreadTube's various personalities, we can clearly see modern incarnations of the elements Marx describes in his coup d'etat, and the coup d'etat assembled by the original Bonapartist. It appears that in order to beat back Donald Trump and the rebellion of the new right wing, Biden assembled his own Society of December 10th. Among its ranks, we find roués, Vosh, literati, ContraPoints, mountebanks, thought slime, Lazzaroni, vagabonds and discharged soldiers, Antifa, the 21st century's digital brothel keepers and the pornography industry, the marijuana and hallucinogen lobby, all of them with dubious means of subsistence and dubious origin, as they collect money from anonymous sources on Patreon and benefit from the convenient love of social media algorithms. And who do they see as their enemy? The laboring nation. While they do not call out the Falun Gong, the Israel lobby, the Miami Cubans, or other foreign policy interest groups who marched on January 6th, they single out the low-income white workers with their Confederate flags as the target. Now, it is certainly right to condemn the use of the Confederate flag, a symbol of a pro-slavery uprising backed by the British Empire and Wall Street insurance cartels. But this is not their real grievance with Middle America. The crime of Middle America is that they do not accept the degrowth presently being forced on them. They do not accept their kids dying from opioids and being locked in for-profit prisons, facing a lifetime of low wages. They do not accept the factories closing down and good-paying jobs disappearing as we transition to a global low-wage economy. They do not accept the idea that the working people are merely evil, privileged Euro settlers who deserve to be poorer as retribution for historical and ongoing injustices. They do not accept that Silicon Valley should rule over all society, determining what ideas are acceptable and what are not in discourse. They do not accept the postmodernist commandment that Jesus Christ and his teachings of kindness and brotherhood should be replaced with academic moral relativism, Aleister Crowley's do as thou wilt, or Ayn Rand's virtue of selfishness. They do not see human solidarity as inherently totalitarian and fascist. They do not see the celebrated individualism of a few lumpen content creators who are triggered by class struggle rhetoric and popular will as worthy of holding back all of humanity's dreams for a better future. All right, Uyghurs. Thank you, Neil Fraser, and we'll talk about the Uyghur stuff for sure. Right. All right. Let us be reminded of Lenin's very famous essay, Imperialism and the Split in Socialism, where he ripped to shreds the social chauvinists who dominated the various social democratic parties of the world, but ended by urging genuine revolutionaries not to abandon their task. Quote, neither we nor anyone else can calculate precisely what portion of the proletariat is following and will follow the social chauvinists and opportunists. This will be revealed only by the struggle, and it will definitely be decided only by socialist revolution. And it is therefore our duty, if we wish to remain socialists, to go down lower and deeper to the real masses. This is the whole meaning and the whole purport of struggle against opportunism. By exposing the fact that the opportunists and social chauvinists are in reality betraying and selling the interests of the masses, that they are defending the temporary privileges of a minority of workers, that they are vehicles of bourgeois ideas and influences, that they are really allies and agents of the bourgeoisie, we teach the masses to appreciate their true political interests and to fight for socialism and for revolution through all the painful vicissitudes of imperialist wars and imperialist armistices. That's Lenin. The broad masses of Americans are full of anger and ripe for rebellion against the same forces from which China, Russia, Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, Vietnam, Iran, Syria, and many other countries have already broken free. The ultra-rich class of multinational oligarchs and their great reset would destroy the lives of the American proletariat and drive it down to third world conditions, all to facilitate the high-tech, low-wage economy that no longer deems their labor power to be valuable. It is only It is not only white Americans who are ready to rebel. The Black Lives Matter uprising, the refusal of Minister Louis Farrakhan to support Hillary Clinton, the rise of black and Chicano nationalism, the increased Asian American political awareness, the massive demonstrations against U.S. complicity in Israeli crimes by Arab Americans, these all show rising opposition to the Wall Street, Silicon Valley New World Order among all different strata of the American working class. With the voices purporting to represent the Marxist movement having turned their back on them, the rising anger of the American working class manifests itself in many confused ways. Conspiracy theories, libertarianism, and other delusions take the place of scientific socialism. This can only be resolved by conscious revolutionaries abandoning the protest cages and liberal safe spaces, and spreading the liberating truth in places that it has never been heard. The future of socialism is getting out of the movement and to the masses. Donald Trump attempted to hijack this rising discontent, and his racist demagogy appealing to bigotry and free market, might is right neoliberal thinking certainly took hold. But Trump failed because he was unable to resolve the crisis. The problems Trump claimed to address are rooted in a society of which he is merely a creation, and whose ideology he is a vocal promoter. The problems facing U.S. society are not cultural. They do not flow from a lack of gender studies courses or anti-racist trainings in workplaces, and they will not be resolved with employee stock ownership programs or kneeling ceremonies on Capitol Hill. The only solution to the crisis facing U.S. society is a government of action that fights for working families. The broad masses of people who have been misdirected by phonies of both the right and the synthetic left must demand swift government action to resolve the crisis. The banks, factories, industries, and all centers of economic power must be controlled by popular power. The chaos of the market must be eliminated, and a rational, centrally planned economy must emerge to replace the nightmare of capitalism in order to ensure that growth and human progress are unending. The awakening of the American proletariat will be a gradual, difficult process, but it is the only way in which the present conditions and the failures of decaying capitalism and imperialism can be resolved. As Marx reminded us in his pamphlet on Louis Bonaparte, proletarian revolutions, like those of the 19th century, constantly criticize themselves, constantly interrupt themselves in their own course, return apparently accomplished in order to begin anew. They deride with cruel thoroughness the half-measures, weakness, and paltriness of their first attempts. They seem to throw down their opponents only so the latter may draw new strength from the earth and rise before them again more gigantic than ever, recoil constantly from the indefinite colossalness of their goals, until a situation is created which makes all turning back impossible, and the conditions themselves call out, "Here's the rose, now dance." On that note, folks, we will now have our roll call. That is from BreadTube Serves Imperialism. I hope you enjoy it. If you haven't gotten a copy of it, this is my polemic against the new internet brand of pseudo-socialism and my call to restore Marxism and dialectical materialism and revolutionary proletarian socialism against the BreadTube distortions. Get your copy today. BreadTube Serves Imperialism. All right, who is with us? We've got Arturo in Anchorage, Alaska, Tulare in California, Nassau County, Char Darling. Io is listening to the Capitol on audio. Very good. Very, very good. Very good. Great book. Cleveland Pirate Alex, Ashburg, Ash in Chicago, nice one. Caleb, LA, President Jesus, Chaya in Montreal, and the Anarchy of Production, Ryan in Oakland, Elias in Wisconsin, Holly from Queens, Rhode Island. We are ready to change the system, says Kinky, good friend of the program. Tony in Tasmania, Florida, Cedar Park, Texas, Philippe, David in China, Rees in Adelaide, Australia, Michael in Las Vegas, Micah in Las Vegas, West Virginia, Toronto, San Angelo, Solidarity. Shout out to you guys. Great folks out there. Heavy Dukes, Deborah Wilson, good friend of the program, Northern California, Albany, New York, Larry Chu, welcome, welcome, welcome. St. George, Utah, Kingston, Ontario, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio, Mindanao to Midwest, Olympia Logic. Jenny Lynn is a great friend, so is Olympia is a great friend. Kieran from San Diego, also a great friend. Tristan in Maryland, shout out to you, Tristan. Always good to talk to you. Parasocialite. Nadia in East Harlem. Bravo. Caleb says William Kane. Thank you, William Kane. Alan in Chicago, Northern Michigan, Illinois, Florida. Brian Schaefer in Southern Illinois, Springfield, Missouri. Benjamin Carmen, right? Started with radio, Las Vegas. Sharon from Alabama. Neil Frazier in sunny Hong Kong, China. Shout out to you, Neil. Alexandria, Minnesota, Balthazar in Oakland, Sam in Chicago, Sam Netton, Clydebank, Eva in Brooklyn. Shout out to you, Eva. I think you can be, I just made you a moderator. Hello, Mark from California, Solidarity. Shout out to you, Mr. Red. I think you can be a mod as well. You've been here long enough, right? William Kane in Gateshead, England, Florida, Pomona, California, Nick Bay, California, Vicksburg, Michael Rostarucci out in Ithaca, New York. Shout out to you. Tusher Gotti from Connecticut. Shout out to you, Tusher. Ryan in West Michigan. Everyone should hear this. Please hit the like button, says Kinky. Thank you so much. BK, Manchester, United Kingdom. Vinicius in Brazil. Jason in Rome. California loves you, Caleb. Oh, well, I love you back to California. I was just out there and I had a great time. Video coming soon. Troy at work in Kansas City, Missouri, right? Utah, random account. Brilliant, Caleb. We are with you here in Joshua Tree. Eva. Red Illuminati is out there in Bayonne, New Jersey. Shout out to you, Red Illuminati. Good friend of ours. Good friend, good guy. Check out his YouTube channel. But Red Illuminati is a great guy. Just a great guy. So great to have him here. Atlanta, Georgia is here. Jared from the United Corporations of America. Tom Foley. Io is listening to David Harvey. Very good. I've met David Harvey before. Ottawa, Canada. Hey, Caleb, how's it going? It's going very well, David. Going very well. Just had a packed day that I told you about, where I told you about the atmosphere in Manhattan, and now I'm here doing the super chats, and we're having a great night. Can't wait for the California vids, says Jenny Lynn. Well, shout out to you, Jenny Lynn. Great times, great times. Anybody else? Names and locations? Want me to call you out as I see you before we start answering super chats? We got plenty of super chats to get through. Plenty of them to get through. Plenty of them. Another book you all should really try to get your hands on is The Twilight of World Capitalism by William Z. Foster. You can get a PDF of this online if you dig. This is a really important book, written right after World War II, 1948, by a leader of the Communist Party of the United States. He's really great. Bendigo, Australia, David Fox. Shout out to you. Shout out to you, Mr. Red. Wow, always a valuable conversation, says Deborah Wilson. This book is great as well. So Nelson Peary, I recommend. And you can always check out BreadTube Serves Imperialism. When are you planning to come to Texas? I need to get to Texas. There's no date set, but there's an organization on the ground, and I think that may be the next place that I go. Fingers crossed. Nothing happens till it happens. But I also wanted to say there's a lot of people in the chat from Chicago, from the Chicago area, Chicagoland, Illinois. We have people on the ground in Chicago now. There is actually a Chicago reading group that has started. So if you want me to connect you with the Chicago people, send you an email, because there is a Chicago Center for Political Innovation, City Builders reading group that started. There's some great folks out there doing great stuff. So if you send me an email, I'll try my best to connect you with the folks out there. A lot of folks from Chicago are watching, so I don't want you to feel like you're alone out there in Chicago, because you're not. And Chicago is also a place I may be heading toward very soon. No dates set at this time. I think the end of history ended, causing illiberal division over globalization. Leftists are pressured to support the bourgeoisie as still progressive. Okay. End of history ended, right? Liberals, bourgeoisie, still progressive. Still progressive. All righty, very good. Wrote it down. But yes, there's a lot of people in the Chicago area, a lot of people in Texas. This is happening. I mean, we're building this. I mean, we are building the city building tendency. We are building the Center for Political Innovation. It's happening. So, I think, there you go. And Shia is saying if we had an event in Chicago, she would go just to have an excuse to go. So there you go. So yeah, we may be doing something in Chicago pretty soon. Texas and Chicago are both on the list of places we're going to be doing stuff. The John Brown volunteers are working hard, and I'm sure they are anxious to, get themselves, pile into a car or a truck or whatever and get out there to the Midwest and start doing their work. They're doing a great job here. Shout out to the John Brown volunteers. Great folks. If you want to send them a donation, you can. They can always use your help. David Harvey's online lectures on Capital are great and worth listening to while reading Capital, says Io. I will write that down, Io. I will definitely talk about that. I've heard some of those lectures. All right. David Harvey on Capital lectures. I'll see if I can make some comments about that later. All right. So the first question was agribusiness and its role in U.S. imperialism. Well, this is kind of interesting because it's very important. And I'm really glad the person asked this because if you look at the role of American agribusiness, you're getting to the essence of what imperialism is. Okay? You are getting to the essence of what imperialism is if you look at the role that American agribusiness plays around the world. For example, right? The people of Mexico have been growing their own food for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, but now they don't. And why? Because of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, created a situation where American agribusiness, farm subsidies, the American government subsidizes farm. They pay farmers not to grow food. Did you know that? If you're a farmer and you don't grow food, the government pays you not to grow food. The government also buys food from farmers and destroys it. Did you know that? Yes, that's true. The government buys food from big agribusiness farms and destroys it in order to inflate the price of food. And that American agribusiness, huge, conglomerates, Kraft, some of these other big, huge food corporations, they distribute food all over the world. And because they're subsidized, they could go, because of NAFTA. NAFTA required Mexico to give up the protections of its industries. And because of NAFTA, the USA was able to go into Mexico and put all the domestic farmers out of business. And now Mexico imports its food from American corporations. Same thing happened in Haiti. The same thing happened in many parts of the world. And this is the nature of imperialism. Imperialism is about, monopolies. All right, China be imperialist. All right. This is the nature of monopolies. It's about destroying the domestic economy and it's the export of capital. All right, this is the export of capital. For thousands of years, we've had countries export products, but imperialism is the export of capital. It's when companies based in Western countries set up shop in developing countries, and instead of having their own economy emerge, the developing countries, they get absorbed as captive markets of the corporations based in the West. And that's what happened. And that's what happened to Mexico, right? If you look at it, Mexico's, agricultural sector got put out of business and absorbed, and we exported our agribusiness corporations, the export of capital, to Mexico, right? That's NAFTA. That's what happened. And there's many examples of this. And, in the agricultural sector, that's some of the most blatant examples of this. After the Soviet Union fell, in Russia, the Soviet Union fell, and they had collective farms. And the collective farms all over Russia were bought up by American companies, in many cases, who just closed them down. They just closed them down. They would buy them, right? The workers at the farms, they would have a share that they could sell, and so everyone was poor, and the Soviet Union just fell, and so they would sell their share. And then American companies would buy these farms in Russia, and they would just shut them down. Thousands of farms all over Russia shut down as after the fall of the Soviet Union. And what did Russia have to do? It had to start importing its food from the United States. And in the 1990s, Russia was importing its food from the United States, right? The export of capital. right? Now you'll notice that Putin has completely reversed that. Now that Putin has rebooted Russia's economy, now they have actually a booming farm sector. The Russian government has created farming all over the country, and they're having some of the biggest agricultural output they've ever had. That's been part of the Putin readjustment of the economy. But in the 90s, when Russia was collapsing, when it was basically being economically colonized by Western corporations and carved up by BP and HSBC Bank and Hermitage Capital Management, and part of that was putting their domestic agriculture out of business and having a situation where they had to import their food, from the United States. Do you think psych drugs are not for everyone? Right. Psych drugs not for everyone. So there you go. And they had to import their food. And this is the nature of it. There's a documentary, I think it's called King Corn, and it talks about how there's a lot of foods in the United States that have corn in them. Did you know that? All kinds of foods have corn in them, high fructose corn syrup, and it is a sweetener made from corn that is not necessary, right? But all kinds of foods have it because where do you grow corn? In the United States. And that all over the world, people eat food that has high fructose corn syrup in it because that is a subsidy to American agribusiness. And it's unbelievable, right? Corn grows in the United States. It doesn't grow very well in other parts of the world. So all over the world, all kinds of food products are pumped full of corn because it's, American agribusiness. It's pretty unbelievable, right? So yes, the agribusiness, right? And we're not talking about small farmers here. We're talking about the giant agribusiness corporations. Yes, they are a big, essential part of U.S. imperialism, a very big part of it. It must be said that, it's not a very free market situation. When you have the government, when you have the government paying farmers not to grow food, when you have the government buying milk and dumping it out, when you have the government burying cheese, did you know that? The government buys cheese and then buries it, in order to keep the price of cheese and milk high enough. If you have all that kind of stuff going on, that's not exactly a free market situation, but it's the state teaming up with the big monopolies to inflate prices. A lot of people have pointed out that in a lot of ways, food stamps are a big part of that. They're a big part of American agribusiness. That if there wasn't food stamps, then American agribusiness would lose a lot of products, right? And that these things are complicated. So yes, when you talk about American agribusiness, that's a big part of U.S. imperialism. And if you look at the role that American agribusiness plays in the world, that is the nature of imperialist economics. That is the nature of imperialist economics. That is the essence of it, right? So there you go. And Shaya is pointing out that food stamps also exist in order to keep wages low. And that is a very good point as well, right? That food stamps kind of subsidize low wages. Employers don't have to pay their employees enough that they can eat on it, right? If you go to Walmart, they actually have instructions for their employees about how to apply for food stamps because they're not paying you enough that you can eat off of it. That's ridiculous, right? And that, they should force these employers to pay people enough that they can eat. But there you go. All righty. Next question. Narcissism and the destruction of community in the West, is that going to make it too hard for socialism? In a way, sure. You could say the way things are now. I mean, we're so far from socialism. There's such a lack of solidarity, right? Such a lack of solidarity. I see pro-life war supporters. Such a lack of solidarity that, it pushes austerity. I think it helps. It helps the current system, but at the same time, I think that it may also, the fact that things are so extreme here, that there is so much individualism, so much breakdown of community, and so much narcissism, it may actually cause things. Things have gotten so bad here that when things turn around, they'll turn around in a much more dramatic way than they would in other Western countries. Narcissism is an interesting thing. You know, a lot of people, when you talk about narcissism, you think about people that are just full of themselves, people that are just egotistical. They think they can do no wrong and all that. But, and a lot of people think a narcissist and a sociopath or a psychopath is the same thing, and they're not, right? A psychopath doesn't care. A psychopath is largely indifferent to how other people see them, right? They're just they kind of lack basic empathy. They just don't think about other people. A narcissist, on the other hand, is desperately in need of constant approval from other people. A narcissist, they are desperate for attention, desperate for approval. They're constantly boasting, constantly trying to get you to think how amazing they are. I had a teacher in high school, and it's interesting. I'm not going to say too much. I got to be careful how I say this, but I had a teacher in high school who was a chronic narcissist. This man was I think about this and I laugh, because it's like I look at it now and I laugh and I think, wow, like if I met somebody who was like this in real life now, I would almost laugh at them. It's almost like a caricature. This high school teacher I had, he would begin his class, the first day of class, and I had him, I think I took 2 different classes with him in high school. The first day of class, we watched a PowerPoint presentation where he showed us all of the awards he had won for being a good teacher. He had won teaching awards. And we sat there in the class, click, and this is the award that I won in 1993, click, and this is the award, where he shows us on the first day all the awards he's won for being an amazing teacher. Okay? Now, that in and of itself is a very narcissistic thing to do. I later found out how it was he won these awards, and that there was a club at my school that he was like the what do you call it, the faculty advisor for, and he would pressure the students in this club to nominate him for teaching awards. Like he would take them aside. Hey, there's this award for like teacher of the year or something. I need you to fill this form. And he would like stand with them and make them fill out the forms to nominate him for teaching awards. So he could then begin his class the next year. And then I won this award in 1995. That's a narcissist, okay? But it got worse than that. Got much worse than that. The guy had become a licensed health inspector, okay? He had gotten certified to inspect restaurants for their healthy, for how healthy they were. This is one of the things he would tell us, on the first day when he's bragging about all his accomplishments. And apparently with this club that he was the faculty advisor for, I can't be specific. I'm from a very small town, and people are immediately going to think of who this is, so I have to be very careful how I talk about these things. But when he would take this club on like field trips, they would stop at like McDonald's on the way home, and he would have to pull out his badge, and show off that he was a health inspector, and show off, and he would inspect the McDonald's to just, impress everybody, and these kids that were in his club, they all kind of hated him deep down. They all kind of hated him. They liked his club. They thought he was entertaining, but they all kind of couldn't stand his narcissism. And he was in this club, and they would, stop at McDonald's or stop at whatever restaurant, and he'd pull out his badge, and they'd inspect it, and he'd show them how amazing he was, that he was a health food inspector, he would do that, and they would all be sitting there like, does he have to do this again? And, the level of narcissism that this man had was just intoxicating. He was an intoxicating narcissist. And I feel like now, I was a high school kid. I didn't know any better. I just thought, this is an adult. This is one of my teachers. Okay, he's a lot more enthusiastic than any of the other teachers I have. Most of my teachers don't care, right? Most of the teachers I had really didn't care, right? I mean, I had teachers who just didn't care. My freshman year of high school, I had a teacher who was she was a basketball coach, and she didn't care. She didn't teach. She just assigned homework. She did not teach. We just had study hall for class because she didn't teach. She didn't care about teaching. Ottoman Empire, Atlanticist, and she just didn't care. But I remember, this guy, okay, I kind of liked him, I guess. Like, he seemed a little more enthusiastic than my other teachers. This guy was a chronic narcissist. And I think about that when he's showing off his awards and when he's inspecting restaurants, and This guy I mean, it was like, it was a level of deranged narcissism. And he was kind of a bully. He liked to make fun of students for their shortcomings and all that. But if anyone made the slightest joke about him, he would get red in the face and fly into a rage. He was definitely a narcissist. There's a lot of people like that. You know, if you live in the United States, you're going to encounter narcissists. You're going to encounter people. But I guess the point that I'm making about narcissism, the point that I'm making is that, is that the thing with a narcissist is not a sociopath. Narcissists can be very cruel. They can be very nasty. They can be very indifferent to other people's feelings. But the difference is that beneath it all is weakness. Weakness. There's a huge amount of weakness in narcissism. That narcissists, they're very vulnerable. They're very, very vulnerable. The reason that they're constantly performing for everybody, look how amazing I am. The reason that they're constantly doing that is because when it gets down to it, they have very little self-esteem. They have very little self-confidence. You know, and you got to think about it. I think about this teacher I had who's showing us all the awards he's won. You know, at the end of the day, like the fact that he had to do that, behind it all, he's still a high school teacher in a small town. And that's kind of what that was all about. It's kind of what that was all about. He was defensive about the fact that at the end of the day, he's still a high school teacher in a small town in Ohio. And that's really what it was all about, right? And that's what all the narcissism was all about. I mean, it was this performance to cover up for the fact that he didn't really think highly of himself and his position in life. And that's what narcissism in a lot of cases is, and that social media kind of feeds that narcissism because everyone's showing off their achievements on social media. Look what I've done. Look how look at what my kid has done. Look at what, social media kind of feeds that, right? So there is a lot of narcissism in U.S. culture. And, it's interesting. And I think a lot of people really like narcissists from a distance. And this is an interesting thing. A lot of people really like to watch narcissists from afar, because they're fun to watch. Donald Trump was very entertaining. Donald Trump was a narcissist. He was very fun to watch, right? Narcissists, all right, DPRK. All right, DPRK. Narcissists can be fun to watch from a distance, right? Because they have a lot of confidence, and with their confidence that's covering up their underconfidence, they can be very, very entertaining. But knowing them up close is never pleasant, right? Never pleasant, right? From a distance, they're fun to watch. But when you actually sit down and interact with somebody who's chronically narcissistic, you can't have a conversation with them. You're not there, right? They're hearing themselves. And again, I think narcissists, while they may be able to perform well in some cases, they're not very effective in actual face-to-face interactions. They can be very, very weak. Your inspiring polemic called for unending growth. What would you respond to critics' infinite growth? It comes up in every stream, but we'll talk about that again. A lot of super chats to get through, but that's okay. I appreciate the support of this community. And now we're going to keep going because we talked about narcissism for a while, and now China banning girly men on video games. I've heard that they have new restrictions on video games. It's based on, I think, what they think is best for mental health and their concerns about scamming on the internet and such. I've heard this thing about girly men. I don't know the specifics of it. I really don't know the specifics of it, and I don't want to speak for them. And a lot of times things have different meanings in different cultures. Like I said, when we, things have different meanings in different cultural contexts. What does that mean? I will never forget. Wow, another tangent, right? Well, I will never forget that. Well, that actually, never mind. I'm not going to go down there. But China banning these video games and these supposed girly men or whatever. I don't know what that means, and I don't know why that means. I don't know the context, and you have to understand that China is in a state of transition. China is in a state of transition. As a society, technology is becoming widely available. People are being lifted out of poverty, and this is they're restricting things like online gaming. Online gambling is a big thing in China. I know, and that they've been trying to regulate that. There's online gambling addiction is something that has affected a lot of people in China. And they're trying to regulate all of this, right? I mean, they have a market sector, but they have a socialist planned economy, so that growth is not restrained and is not held back by the irrationality of capitalist greed. And they're transitioning their society very rapidly from third world conditions to first world conditions, and that changes a lot of things, and not everything is as simple as it seems. So there you go. All right. Somebody asked me about some guy who makes videos about me. I know about these things. These things get handed to me. I know about them. I know I'm in the Netflix documentary. I know about that also. And, honestly, these people are not worth paying attention to. They're really not worth paying attention to. They're really not worth paying attention to. I mean, I can't stop you from watching them, and I will occasionally watch some of this stuff. I'm not always, some of it is so predictable that I watch about 2 seconds of it, and it's like, okay, whatever, and in some cases I want them. I really wish they would do something. I'm thankful in some cases for these attacks because it's publicity, right? It brings people. How many of you here would never have heard of me if it hadn't been for one of these big name YouTube people, screaming and calling me nasty names and spreading lies about me? Seriously, there's a lot of people here, a lot of people who are watching right now who are here because of the hit pieces. So on the one hand, no publicity is bad publicity. Anything that will help build this community and expand our message is appreciated, on the one hand. On the other hand, some of this stuff is so over the top and dishonest, and so nasty and despicable, and that you can't, it's not worth engaging with, right? And that's kind of my attitude. In the BreadTube book, I mentioned quite a few people in this book. I mentioned Vosh, I mentioned Skippy the Bear, I mentioned ContraPoint. There's a number of these people I didn't mention. And why did I not mention them? Because they didn't say anything of substance. They didn't say anything of substance, right? I mean, I've watched their pieces and all that. They don't have anything to say. A lot of these people don't do anything. They play other people's videos and they go, I could do that with anything, right? I mean, we could put on, we could put on, what is it? We could put on like the best movie ever made, and I could sit there and we could put it in the corner of the screen and I could go, I mean, that's not an argument. There's no substance to that, right? And these people don't have anything of substance to say, and they're desperate for materials. They got to talk about somebody. And you look at them, they're scrambling through the internet. Who can I make fun of? Who can I insult today? Not worth our time, right? Not worth our time. And if we spend too much time engaging with what these people say, thinking about what they say, we're doing ourselves a disservice because we're better than that. We have an actual message, and they never can argue with what we actually say, right? These particular creatures can't argue with what we actually say. They can only argue with some kind of caricature. There's a level, you have to almost pity them on some level, because, I mean, there are a lot of the bread tubers, as I wrote an entire book about, have real political differences with me, right? I mean, Vosh, he thinks that socialism is an employee stock ownership program. Well, chapter 2 of my book shows pretty clearly that's not the case. So there you go. ContraPoints doesn't really have a problem with capitalism. She has a problem with this secret Nazi conspiracy that's infiltrated the government. She thinks there's a whole bunch of people who, they put their hand behind their ear, or they, they're all part of this secret diabolical Nazi plot. And, I that's a real political difference I can write about, right? A lot of the breadtube community, they oppose economic growth, and they want to reduce living standards, and they want the human population to decrease, and they are in favor of driving living standards down. Well, that I can talk about in this book. But when people just sit there and play my videos and laugh about it, what am I going to say to that? I mean, well, I should play their videos and laugh about it, except I owe you guys a better product than that. I got better things to talk about than that. And people are just going to take things I say out of context to try and make it look like I'm some kind of reprehensible person or something. I mean, that's not a valuable use of my time to interact with them. And you feel sorry for them on some level, because it shows that, like, there are things we really disagree about, right? They think socialism is an employee stock ownership program. I think socialism is the banks, factories, and industries being organized to serve public good and not the profits of a few. So why don't we make a video about that? Right, make a video about how I'm wrong, and socialism is just, you and your friends start a pencil factory together. It's not, workers controlling the means of production. Make a video on that. They can't do that. No, no, no. Everything is just, let's find something he said and take it out of context to mean that he's a Nazi, and to mean that he's a white supremacist, and to mean that he wants to kill all gay people or something like that. It's like, I clearly am not a white supremacist. I clearly am not a neo-Nazi. I'm clearly not, homophobic or transphobic or whatever. So, but if you dig, you can take anything out of context. You can, so it's like, what is there to engage with? When people act that way, what is there to engage with? When people took a paragraph that I wrote a long time ago, and I'll be honest, I've made mistakes over the years. There are some things I've said and written before that I shouldn't have written, and I've done my best to correct that. But over the years, look, when somebody, anyway, the point being, when someone takes a paragraph that I wrote calling for working people of the United States, of all nationalities, all the people of the country to unite against imperialism, and they interpret that and they put it next to the 14 words of neo-Nazis, securing the future of white children or something like that, their brain is on backwards. That is, you want to talk, they take something I wrote that has pages and pages and pages supporting Black Lives Matter and Ferguson and the prison industrial complex. They have me talking about how the people of the United States need to come together, black, white, and all that, to resist imperialism. And they say that is the same as white supremacists trying to secure the future of the white race or something. They need help. They need help. And that's what they're saying, is that's the kind of debating they're capable of doing. That's what they're saying. When it really gets down to it, that's what they're capable of doing. They're capable of debating on that level. And that's their whole ideology. You watch, ContraPoint's video, How to Spot a Fascist. That's their ideology. They're not socialists. They are people who have been assigned to help defend Joe Biden from this vast secret, Nazi conspiracy that's infiltrated the government. That's what they're doing. They're defending the liberal order from the right at the end of the day, and they can't even understand what the right wing is. To them, the right wing is some secret Nazi Illuminati that has secret hand signs and codes, and they think every right winger is part of it, from Tucker Carlson to Marjorie Taylor Greene to, they're all involved in this vast diabolical plot to, be neo-Nazis or something. It's really kind of sad. They understand politics like it's a really bad movie, right? Imagine you could make some kind of like spy movie of like a secret Nazi secret society infiltrates the government, and some brave YouTuber discovers the hand signs and the signals of who's in the conspiracy and bravely makes a YouTube video. I know who's part of the plot. And, that sounds like a great movie, but that's not how politics really works, right? There are people that are right-wing and racist in our government. And there are divisions in our ruling class, but it's not, this is like, it's like an episode of, do you remember that TV show? It was a TV show that was on PBS, years ago. It was called Ghostbusters. They think they're Ghostbusters. They're the kids in Ghostbusters. That's basically what they are. Or no, it's not Ghostbusters. Ghost Rider. That's what it was. It was on PBS. It was on one of those kids shows where there's this ghost who gives information to these kids and they solve mysteries. That's what they think they're doing. Not Ghostbusters. Ghost Rider. That's what they're doing. They think they're the kids on the 90s PBS TV show Ghost Rider. That's what they think they're doing. And they have the secret code, and anyone who disagrees with them must be part of this vast Nazi conspiracy. Must be, because, because, and that they have the secret information of who's part of the secret Nazi conspiracy. It's silly, right? It's really juvenile, talk to them about economics, talk to them about historical materialism. They don't know what they're talking about. But if you disagree with them, you must be a Nazi. And that's all the attention this deserves, because I got many other super chats to get to. But when people are that shallow, I don't know. Again, I argued with the bread tubers' points, with the actual points they make, but the ones who don't make points and just attack me and just take things I say out of context, you can't engage with that. You can't engage with that, right? I mean, you're kind of cheapening yourself when you engage with that. So, somebody mentioned something earlier. I don't engage with that. Largely, I don't engage with that because, I mean, what is there to engage? What is there to say when someone does that, right? What is there to say? You can't engage with that. All right. Great reset. The great reset. The great reset. Um, the Great Reset is an attempt to restructure the U.S. economy in the aftermath of the pandemic. And it's going to involve Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley that are, they're trying to restructure the economy. Amazon is going to be key. Walmart is going to be key, and it's the big monopolies have secured their monopolies with the pandemic. That happens, right? When there's a situation like this, little businesses go out of business, and the big monopolies have a more secure monopoly than ever before. And the tech monopolies are the main ones pushing the Great Reset, and they are emphasizing the need to reduce consumption, and it's for environmental reasons. They're emphasizing that, oh, wow, look, the pandemic has been so good for Mother Earth because we're putting it out, and why can't we keep stuff like this going? Can't we just keep the economy? Can't we just have slow economic growth? Can't we reduce living standards? And they want to kind of keep the economy from speeding up again, because then that'll mean that new competitors will emerge, and their secure monopoly from the pandemic will be secure. And this has been the worldview of the ultra rich, not most of the rich. Most of the rich want to make money. Most of the rich are entrepreneurial. They want to make money. Hotel owners, restaurant owners, owners of casinos. There's all kinds. Most capitalists just want to make money. But among the ultra rich, among the managerial ruling class, there has long been an attitude that in order to, that we need everything to just slow down. Just slow down, stop economic growth, roll back living standards. That is, the Rockefellers, the Council on Foreign Relations. You can go back to Cecil Rhodes. And you can talk about the Anglo-American establishment or the Eastern establishment. Among certain factions of the ruling class, there has long been a feeling that we need to just kind of stop economic growth so we can stay at the top. And that is the prevailing view of Bill Gates. That's the prevailing view on Silicon Valley. And that is, the Great Reset is largely an attempt of those folks to kind of keep the economy from ever speeding back to where it was before and secure their monopoly and kind of transition us to a post-industrial society with lower living standards. And that is certainly a threat. I mean, it's not thrilling. It's not good. I mean, working people aren't going to stand for that. They're going to keep fighting back, and they're going to keep calling them Nazis. And in a lot of ways, look, before the pandemic, you had the Yellow Vests, and the Yellow Vests were fighting against that in France. It was about how they felt that, these fuel taxes that were being done in the name of climate change were hurting the lives of working people. And there is going to be a working class rebellion against austerity. Look, in Western countries, the living standard is going down. The ruling class of the Western countries has determined that they are going to drop the living standard. And the working people of the Western countries are going to keep resisting that. And right now, because the left is so confused and has lost its mind, the right is giving expression to that. But it won't be able to really continue doing that because the right doesn't understand what's happening and why it's happening. Only we understand this. We understand this. We understand the problem of overproduction, the problem of the falling rate, the tendency of the falling rate of profit. We understand the crisis that capitalism is in. We know why this crisis is happening, and we have a solution. And the synthetic left doesn't have a solution, and the right certainly doesn't have a solution. They think it's all communism, and they want to privatize everything. They want austerity. Well, we have a solution. So eventually, the delusions and the confusion and the conspiracy theories are going to have to fade away, and we are going to have to, those of us who really believe in socialism, the constructive socialist city-building tendency, we are going to have to be the leaders of the resistance to the dropping living standards across the West. The ruling class has decided that living standards in the West are going to drop, and the working people don't want their living standards to drop. Human beings want more than what they already have. We know why this is happening, and we know what can change it. Libertarians don't, and the synthetic left doesn't. We do, and we know, and so there you go. It's going to be a matter of time. They're going to have to learn it. They're going to resist. They're going to do everything they can to not hear it. They're going to try their hardest not to hear what we have to say. But more and more, they're going to have to recognize that we understand what this is about. So there you go. Media freak out with Biden over withdrawal from Afghanistan. Well, look, Maduro has come forward and he has speculated that Biden was given bad intelligence about how the pullout from Afghanistan was handled. That indicates that they almost sabotaged the pullout to make it be as messy as it was, to make Biden, look bad. And look, right now the media is really playing up this, oh, this is what happens when the USA pulls out of countries. Oh, see, we didn't intervene. Oh, look, you anti-war people got what you want, and look how bad it is. They're playing that up right now, right? They're playing that up like crazy. And the media in the United States has really turned into the war lobby. Even though the public wants peace. I mean, the media has largely, the way that they've been handling the Biden administration, the way they acted at Helsinki and the summit, the media has largely turned into the war lobby, and we're seeing that right now. But they kind of worked very hard to cover up how bad it was while the USA was occupying the country. A lot of the atrocities took years to be published. A lot of the horrific reality of what was going on in Afghanistan since the USA invaded never made it into the U.S. media. But now that it's pulling out, oh my God, oh my God. And the USA has pulled out in a pretty sloppy manner, and apparently it appears that Biden was given bad intelligence, and that maybe the intelligence agencies wanted the pullout to be chaotic in order to discredit Biden, so maybe set the stage for Kamala Harris to be president. So, there you go. There you go. Someone else said, should you watch people who make good content and are critical of me? I can't tell you who to watch. I watch all kinds of people on YouTube, people who talk about all kinds of different things. So I can't tell you who to watch. I can't really tell you who to watch. But largely, I will say that, if somebody is hostile to what we do here, more often than not, it indicates that they're not very deep. Okay? And then you have to ask yourself, is this who I should get my information with about Marxism? I mean, that's a fair question, I mean, look, if you're watching somebody talk about cooking, great. I don't know anything about cooking. I don't cook. I mean, I barely ever cook. I mean, I'm not a cooking guy. So, fine. But if somebody is talking about Marxism, right? And their criticism of me is, oh, he said socialism with American characteristics. That's racist. I mean, is that really who you want to watch? Or he supports China and everyone knows China's a Nazi country. Is that who you should be watching? I mean, you can disagree with me about China. You can even disagree with me about socialism with American characteristics. But if that is somebody who's at that level, who you want to get your information about Marxism from, I mean, up to you. Up to you. But, I mean, again, there are people out there with different views. I mean, I watch channels of people I vehemently disagree with, and I always learn from them. So I'm not going to tell you who to watch, but I just, keep in mind that, there is criticism of me, and then there's criticism of me. A lot of the criticism of me leveled at me by other leftists is really shallow, and it indicates that the person making that criticism doesn't know what they're talking about. So that's probably a sign that they might not be a good source to learn about these things from. Alrighty. Would I have Kenneth Hammond on my show to talk about China? Sure, I would happily talk to him. I mean, if he wants to talk to me, if you can send me his information, sounds like a good guy. I'm always interested in learning more about China. Very good. All right. Occupy Wall Street 10th anniversary. That's right. September 17th will be the 10-year anniversary of Occupy Wall Street. 10 years ago, around this time, I was going to meetings in Tompkins Square Park and arguing with people about their democratic procedures where, you had to do your twinkle fingers, you couldn't clap, and you could block, and they had all these hand signs, and I was arguing with them about the hand signs, and yeah, we didn't really know what was going to be there on September 17th. I remember I was, and it wasn't even supposed to be in Zuccotti Park, right? That's where the occupation ended up happening. It was actually, the occupation, the place that it happened, that it happened, at first it was down by the Bull, right? There's that Bull on Wall Street, that big, brass bull. That's where it started out. Solidarity with America, right? That's where it started out. So there you go. Alrighty. But yeah, it's going to be the 10-year anniversary. A lot to think about. Maybe I'll do a special stream or something. I might even go to the park that day. We'll see. I'm not sure if I'm going to go to the park that day or not. I'll have to talk to people and see if it's a good idea because it's gotten so confused. There's a lot of people have gone in many different directions since those days. All right. Biggest so obviously that was a debate, and the people who called themselves communists, Soros, she, all right, writing it down. The people who called themselves communists were the ones who supported the Soviet Union, but there was the issue of Stalin and Trotsky, right? And you had the Trotskyites who broke from the Communist Party USA. You then later had the issue of black liberation, right? There's been a lot of debate in the U.S. communist movement about black liberation. Do black people constitute a nation within U.S. borders, a colonized people as a nation, or should it simply be understood in terms of discrimination or whatever? Are black people a nation, an oppressed nation, or are they simply a group that suffers from racial discrimination? I mean, that has been a very big point of disagreement among communists over the years. There's been disagreements about tactics. Is it necessary to support the Democrats? Are Republicans fascists, and does that make it necessary to support the Democrats? In the labor movement, how should you operate? Should you reform independent unions that are communist controlled, or should you try to maneuver within the conservative unions, the conservative labor unions that are not controlled by communists? That's the question. So these kind of debates have gone on for a long time. All right. Is populism without Marxist ideology problematic? I mean, yes and no. I mean, look, if it's got to have some ideology if it doesn't have Marxism. And the question is, what is that? I mean, there could be racist populism. That would be bad, right? There could be, there could be, populism that is like socially conservative. Like, there's anti-gay populism. That used to be a very big thing. There used to be a lot of very anti-gay right-wing populism. Populism just kind of means rallying the masses against a perceived elite, right? But then there has been a lot of populism in U.S. history that was not Marxist, but it was of a progressive character. Look, the People's Party, the populist movement, was a movement that was originally an anti-racist movement. It was a continuation of the Republican Party and what they believed, and as Lincoln died and the Republican Party was moving in a more conservative direction, you had the People's Party that emerged. It was originally anti-racist. The Free Soilers. They wanted to nationalize the railroads, nationalize the banks. They were a progressive movement. Now, unfortunately, as they kept going for a little bit, racism inserted itself, and eventually they went back into the Democratic Party because they became racist. But originally, Southern populism was anti-racist and progressive, and was for the common people. They talked about the producing class and and there was a class conscious edge to American populism. Huey Long was not a Marxist, but he was an anti-racist, and he very much was fighting for the working class and creating social programs to help people. And he very much benefited the workers of Louisiana, both white and black. And it was in the context of Jim Crow in the South, but he did a lot. I mean, he enabled black people to become nurses. Black voter registration increased, Irish potato famine. There's a lot of, populism is a very broad thing. And the fact that the synthetic left has painted all populism as dangerous, that shows you exactly what they're about. They're just defenders of an elite. So there you go. All right. China crackdown on bourgeois celebrity culture. What's going on in terms of a crackdown on bourgeois celebrity culture? I mean, is that happening? Because I'm hearing a lot of different things. I mean, I know China has implemented some reforms regarding how businesses operate. I know businesses are being encouraged to, give more of their money to like socialist and community projects. I know that they're breaking up some of the monopolies that have emerged in the market sector. But what does this mean? They're cracking down on bourgeois celebrity culture. I mean, what does that mean? Are they outlawing certain things? I don't know what that means, right? To some degree or other, celebrity culture can be a little bit toxic, but But I mean, it's not as bad as it used to be. And social media kind of gives people the ability to follow their own celebrities, right? It's not we're not all following the same people, right? And that kind of has changed the nature of celebrity culture. Plus, people, the celebrities they do like, people are able to feel almost more connected to, because every time they can follow their social media, they can watch videos of them. So there, there you go. Pejorative use of the term internationalist. I think there's people on the right who they would accuse people that they think are disloyal to the country. They think they don't, put their country first. They would say, "Oh, you're an internationalist. You're an internationalist." I think that's what that refers to. They're arguing that you're not loyal. You don't seek to benefit the people of your own country, and they use internationalist as a slur, and that's confused, and that's incorrect. And I mean, we have to get back to what Mao says in the Little Red Book, that there is no contradiction between patriotism and internationalism, right? That in order to truly be a patriot, you must be an internationalist, right? In order to truly want what's best for your country, you want it to get along with other countries. You want the whole world to prosper. But in order to be truly an internationalist, you must want your country to get better and have things get better for it as well. And that patriotism and internationalism are not contradictory. National chauvinism is definitely contradictory with internationalism. If you think that your nation, your country, your nationality is better than other people, you want your nationality to succeed at the expense of other people, that is definitely contradictory to internationalism. Absolutely, right? One cannot be a national chauvinist and an internationalist. One cannot be a national chauvinist and a socialist by any means. If you're going around and saying, I fight for my group and screw everybody else, I want my group to rule over other people, then you can't be a socialist, you can't be an internationalist. But patriotism and internationalism are not contradictory at all. All right. And people that use the word internationalist as a slur, they're not understanding that. They're arguing that if you're an internationalist, that means you must not want what's best for your own country, and they're not getting that at all. Ethiopia and Eritrea. So Ethiopia, as you know, was a kingdom. It was an independent African country that was ruled by the Emperor Haile Selassie. And it was a Christian kingdom, and it was in North Africa, and it was colonized by Italy. Mussolini invaded Ethiopia in 1935. He sent the military to take over Ethiopia, and the Soviet Union was the only country in the world that came to the support of Ethiopia. Communists around the world had hands-off Ethiopia demonstrations. And Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, the emperor of Ethiopia, went into exile. He lived in London, and he had a sexual affair with Sylvia Pankhurst, the very famous suffragist and anarchist in Britain. I don't know what that was about, but Haile Selassie, and he's the guy that the Rastafarians worship, by the way. The Rastafarianism, reggae music, they worship Haile Selassie, the emperor of Ethiopia. And so Ethiopia was this kingdom. In the 70s, Haile Selassie was overthrown. Okay. Iraqi Kurdistan. Okay. Haile Selassie was overthrown, and there was a government that took power in Ethiopia. It was called the Derg, which was like the council. It was a military grouping called the Derg. And the Derg took power. Leader of the Derg was Mengistu. Mengistu was the leader of the Derg. And the Derg was aligned with the Soviet Union and with Cuba. And Cuba sent its military to support the Derg. And the Soviet Union gave military aid to the Derg. And the Derg was this socialist, Marxist government. They redistributed land. They had literacy campaigns. A very poor country, but they did stuff. That was in Ethiopia. So Eritrea is a region, that was considered to be part of Ethiopia at the time, that was fighting for its independence. So there was a divide among the Eritrean resistance. Okay, some of the Eritreans, because the Derg had come to power, they said, okay, we're going to get regional autonomy, so we'll remain part of Ethiopia. We'll get regional autonomy under the pro-Soviet Derg government. However, there were some Eritrean resistance forces that said, oh no, I don't care if it's the Derg or Haile Selassie, Eritrea is still a separate country. So there was a split among the Eritrean national resistance. Some of them supported the Derg, and some of them continued fighting for their national liberation. So the ones who fought for their national liberation, continued fighting for their national liberation against the Derg, and actually ended up getting CIA support, were the Maoists, the Maoist communists, right? It was the ML, like pro-Soviet communists who supported the Derg because the Derg was pro-Soviet, and it was the Maoist communists in Eritrea that fought, that fought against Ethiopia, which was a Soviet-aligned government under the Derg, and they were the ones that ultimately established what is now the government of Eritrea. The government of Eritrea is led by Maoist communists, or they're not Maoist communists anymore, but they were at that point Maoist communists who had been aligned with the United States and China against the Soviet-aligned government of Ethiopia, the Derg. And that's where Eritrea comes from. Basically, Eritrea emerged. There was a war against the government of Ethiopia, and the USA and China armed, Eritrea to fight against the Derg, and they ultimately won, and they got their independence. So the Eritrean government emerged from all of that. What's interesting, though, is that the Eritrean government, despite the fact that the USA was aligned with them against the Derg, they are now considered to be, they're widely hated. The U.S. imperialists now, the Derg has been overthrown. The government of Ethiopia is no longer a communist or Marxist aligned government. It's now a pro-U.S. government in Ethiopia. So now, the forces in Eritrea, though, are the forces that were aligned with China and the United States against the Derg, are those forces that used to be Maoist communists. Now it's not clear. They believe in, for the good of Eritrea, and they're socialists kind of. It's a very poor country, but the U.S. imperialists now are at odds with them. China is very friendly with the government of Eritrea. The United States is very hostile to the government of Eritrea. And the U.S. often refers to Eritrea as the North Korea of Africa, right? Eritrea is basically, at this point, an anti-imperialist force, whereas the government of Ethiopia, at this point, is aligned with the United States. So that's the situation there, if you want to know about Eritrea and Ethiopia. And there was a lot of division among the communist movement regarding that, because, the Soviet position was to support the Derg. The Chinese position was to support Eritrean resistance. And there was a lot of divide, with Maoist communists would accuse people supporting the Derg of not supporting the independence of the people of Eritrea. And Soviet, aligned communists would accuse people supporting Eritrea of supporting a CIA-backed campaign. Well, it's weird how these things work, right? Things turn into their opposite. Sometimes the United States supported Saddam Hussein. Sometimes the United States supported Iran. That a lot of times the USA will give support to people who, Manuel Noriega, right? Noriega was supported by the United States, the military leader of Panama. They propped him up to fight against communism. But then, when he realized the USA wanted to get rid of him and move toward more of an open society like Soros, wanted to, have a more of an austerity regime, Noriega shifted and started moving in an anti-imperialist direction. So the USA overthrew him. And that a lot of times the USA will back a force, but then that force will start to have its own agenda. Will have its own agenda, and then that agenda will come into conflict with what the American government wants. And that is kind of the nature of the Brzezinski intelligence apparatus. When you talk about counter gangs, I talk about that book, Gangs and Counter Gangs, by Frank Kitson, the British intelligence officer. When you cultivate a counter gang, when a counter gang emerges, when some kind of political force, when some kind of armed group or non-state actor, mass political movement, whatever you want to call it, when one of those groups emerges, right, you will have the state, the U.S. imperialist apparatus. In some cases, they'll prop it up because they see it as useful, but they also, at some cases, will lose control of it, and the group will get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they'll lose control of it. And then they talk about how, you can read Michel Foucault, and you talk about discipline and punish, that a lot of times what happens is these groups, they never really trust these groups, right? They'll prop up. They'll use them as proxies to fight somebody else, but they're constantly punishing them. A great example of that is the Aryan Brotherhood, right? This is a prison gang. I don't know if people ever heard of this. There's a prison gang in the United States called the Aryan Brotherhood, right? And anyone who's ever been to prison will tell you that the Aryan Brotherhood they have a relationship with the guards, right? I mean that they're not just like some resistance group of prisoners. No, they're white supremacists, and they have a relationship with the guards, and they're used against black nationalist groups in the prison. They have a relationship, but there are all kinds of people from the Aryan Brotherhood who are in solitary confinement for the rest of their lives, who have, the guards will, be vicious to the Aryan Brotherhood because they don't want to lose control of it, right? The Aryan Brotherhood is a group of criminals and drug dealers, and, it's not a nice group of people. But it's useful to the guards in the prison sometimes. But they also will be, the guards in the prison will be vicious to the Aryan Brotherhood, right? So it's like the Aryan Brotherhood. They're not, they're a counter gang, I guess, but because they have their own agenda, right? Because they are what they are, heroin dealers and, thugs and, the relationship, yes, the prison guards will use the Aryan Brotherhood to control the prisons, but the Aryan Brotherhood will constantly be challenging the authority of the guards. The guards are constantly trying to control the Aryan Brotherhood. And so it's like it's not that simple, right? And you see that a lot with counter gangs. Great example, the Unification Church, right? This has just been on my mind. So for those of you who aren't aware, I believe it's next week, Donald Trump is going to speak at a rally in South Korea called by the Unification Church. Mrs. Moon, Sun Young Moon's wife, she is going to share the stage basically at this Korean rally for freedom with Donald Trump, right? And the Moonies basically started out and more or less remain a CIA asset organization that was used to fight communists, right? That's true. The Moonies very much were, the Unification Church, the Moonies, Reverend Sun Young Moon, this fanatical religious movement from South Korea that was used to fight communists. That's what they are. But Reverend Moon went to federal prison, Remember that? He went to federal prison. And there's been a lot of American TV documentaries that have exposed them. And, they're one of the most hated churches in the United States. They're considered to be like the main example of what a dangerous cult is and all of that. Well, what's going on there? Well, they also, the Moonies, it's complicated, right? Again, yes, American intelligence propped them up in South Korea to fight communists. Yes, they were brought to the United States to fight communists on college campuses. Yes. But they also had their own agenda. And like the dictator Park, right? When Park Chung-hee, the dictator of South Korea, when he was at odds with the United States, they were with Park, right? And there have been various examples of the Unification Church has its own agenda. And so the CIA disciplines them and sends Reverend Moon to jail. And there's hit pieces about them, and there's all kinds of propaganda, So while they have this relationship with the American deep state is also hostile to them and trying to control them and shoving them. And that's when you're dealing with entities that are violent, right? Like terrorists, like extremist organizations, like criminal organizations. You can't simply be their ally, right? You can use them, but you have to also threaten them. And this is just basic thug logic, right? That if you're dealing with, if you're gonna, and this is the mafia, right? This is basic mafia criminal thug logic that if you're going to be dealing with people that are potentially dangerous, that are potentially, you have to, while at the same time you're using them, you have to constantly be threatening them and showing them that, you have to use the carrot and the stick to kind of control them. And this is the whole Brzezinski, the Taliban, right? The United States used the Taliban to fight the Soviets. Now the USA is fighting the Taliban. But do you think they didn't make some kind of arrangement with the Taliban? Do you think that all these negotiations have been going on, they didn't talk about anything? No, they, it's complicated. And this is the nature of what they call fourth generation warfare. If you read William S. Lind, who's the Pentagon strategist, this is what they're talking about largely. This is the nature of how politics in the late 20th century and 21st century tends to play out with these non-state actors that are kind of manipulated by imperialism Imperialism is manipulating them against anti-imperialists, and this is, this is how the global stage is played out, and this is what Zbigniew Brzezinski kind of was the master of, is how do we, how do we go to all these independent non-state actors, these terrorist groups, these religious extremist organizations, these criminal groups, how do we go to them and use them as useful proxies against the Soviet Union on the one hand, but how do we also control them and get them to do what we want? I mean, this is the nature of the kind of, and this is more the liberal CIA stuff, right? This is not the neocon stuff. This is much more the Brzezinski liberal CIA. This is how they think. It's like, how do we manipulate non-state actors, get them to do what we want, but at the same time, not have them blow back in our face. And, I mean, this is what they do. I mean, this is what the intelligence apparatus largely does, is manipulate non-state actors for their own agenda. I would argue that's what they do. Okay, next question. Occupy Wall Street hijacked by the liberal order. Yes and no. I mean, first of all, I mean, it was never completely a genuine uprising from below. Okay, Adbusters put out the call, and U.S. media was giving it way more play than it does to most protest movements. But at the same time, there was a huge swelling from below of people who agreed with it, and there was kind of a push and shove within the. I mean, the movement was, Occupy Wall Street. There were certain forces that were there that were determined to make sure it never turned into anything that could be the threat to the status quo. But there were also a lot of people that were there that were very good. I mean, a lot of political people, it was a political moment of awakening for them. They'd never done anything political before. They'd never done any activism. And then Occupy Wall Street came along and they did. So it's complicated. But yeah, Occupy Wall Street, there were different forces pushing and pulling on it. Kind of like what I'm talking, in a weird way, Occupy Wall Street wasn't criminal in the sense they weren't terrorists. They weren't drug dealers. They weren't, an extremist religious movement or something like that. But they were a non-state actor, and there were various forces pushing and pulling on Occupy Wall Street. There was a big Ron Paul contingent at Occupy Wall Street. I bet you didn't know that. There were a lot of Ron Paul people. There were voluntarists, libertarians. They were a big part of Occupy Wall Street. There were a lot of people who were at Occupy Wall Street and at the Tea Party. You wouldn't know that. You would think Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party were rivals, but there was a big libertarian, anarcho-capitalist part of Occupy Wall Street. There were also people like me. I'm a tankie. I was part of Occupy Wall Street. I was arrested in Occupy Wall Street demonstrations. There were also a lot of just mainstream liberals and Rachel Maddow fans. And there were, Occupy Wall Street had a lot of different forces trying to nudge it and push it and pull it in different directions. And that's, again, like I said, when you have kind of an entity like Occupy Wall Street, part of what these forces that are trying to do, and different factions in the ruling class, they'll push on it and try and push it in their own way. Is organizing your workplace with the IWW a good idea? Historically, we're talking a long time ago, back when the IWW was big, they didn't believe in signing union contracts because they argued that if you signed a union contract that recognized your boss had the right to exploit you. That's why a lot of the more radical organizers like William Z. Foster and James Cannon and others quit the IWW as they felt that wasn't necessary. I know there have been some workplaces where the IWW has unionized people, and it has been effective, but they're very small now. The IWW now is very, very small, and isolated. It's not what it once was. The IWW was a factor before World War I. It stopped being a factor after that. There are communists in the labor movement. There's a lot of communists in the labor movement trying to work. The leadership of the labor movement is not communist and not revolutionary. I've had people send me emails, people who work in labor unions. They tell me the horror stories about what it's like working in these Democratic Party machines, basically. But there are a lot of communists who work in the labor movement, who are very hardworking, and they get a lot done in spite of, the labor bureaucracy. There are some labor unions that are more radical than others. The United Electrical Workers, UE, the International Longshore Warehouse Union, ILWU, and there's a couple others where there's more of a radical current within the union. That exists, but it's complicated. But, the IWW is not really a factor in the labor movement at this time. That could change, right? That could always change. But right now, the IWW, I wouldn't, they exist. They exist. They're there. You can join on their website or whatever, but they're not, I mean, there's not, they're not leading strikes that are massive that people are involved in and stuff. I mean, it's like, it's the IWW is more for anarchists. It's more of kind of a collective of anarchists rather than a labor union, I would call it. That's my perception of it. I know a lot of good people that are in it and such, but it's more of an association of anarchists rather than a labor union proper. That's what I would argue, and that really it stopped being a factor. Around the time of World War One, it stopped being a factor. The labor movement has kind of moved on from them. But they have the name and they have the legacy of what they So there you go. All right, Lenin versus Stalin in modern Russia. Well, I've explained this before many times. That Stalin is very popular in modern Russia. Lenin is not. Communists in Russia like Lenin, but if you're not a communist, beyond the communists, Lenin is not very popular. Stalin, on the other hand, is viewed by a lot of people who are not communists in Russia as a guy who defeated the Nazis, a guy who industrialized the country, etc. So there's kind of a nationalist appeal for Stalin. And with Lenin, there's a feeling among a lot of nationalists that he was bad for the country. The Russian Civil War, millions of people died. Lenin, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, a lot of Russian territory was handed over. So there's a lot of Russian nationalists who think Lenin wasn't very good for the country, but like Stalin. On the other hand, communists love Lenin. Communists love Lenin. So communists in Russia really like Lenin, but non-communists tend to like Stalin a lot and not like Lenin so much, right? And that's the disagreement. I actually made a video about this in Red Square because it's interesting. In the United States, you would think it's the opposite. You often will get people say, well, Lenin was good, but Stalin was the evil one. That's but in Russia, it tends to be the opposite. You got a lot of people say Lenin wasn't very good for the country. He signed off a bunch of our territory. He started this big civil war. A lot of people died. He killed the Romanov family. He suppressed the Russian Orthodox Church. But Stalin, on the other hand, he defeated the Nazis. He industrialized the country. He brought back the Russian Orthodox Church. He made Russia a very strong country. So it's complicated, right? And that's the weird thing is you have to remember that, everything that we think we know about politics, when you go to Russia, you go to the developing world, it's a totally different ballpark, okay? And that's what, and I would argue that U.S. politics is transitioning to become more like politics in the rest of the world. I would argue that what's going on right now is that U.S. politics is starting to get back to normal more than anything, right? That U.S. politics has been so weird and distorted, really since the beginning of the Cold War, and that now, as the living standard is dropping, as we're entering this global crisis of capitalism, American politics is starting to become more normal, where you have a lot more views. You have socialist currents, you have fascist currents, you have, populism of various stripes, you have different ideologies, you have average people who read books and adopt more obscure ideologies. That happens, in the developing world especially, and also in like France and Germany and stuff. There are normal everyday people who who say, you know what, I'm a Trotskyist, or what, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, or what, it's normal for average people to engage with politics and adopt an ideological political viewpoint. Whereas in the United States, maybe I'm writing it down. In the United States, right now, the viewpoint, for the longest time, average Americans didn't think about politics, and if you engaged with politics, you were weird. Well, now it's not like that anymore. With the internet and with the political crisis, there's a lot of Americans that are digging into politics a little bit more deeply. So there you go. All right, books by W.E.B. Du Bois and William Z. Foster. W.E.B. Du Bois, read his autobiography. It's called Autobiography of W.E.B. Du Bois, and the first section is called Communism, and it just tells you all of his views of communism. It's amazing. Another very good book by W.E.B. Du Bois, very big book, but his Black Reconstruction, which is like his history of the Civil War. It's amazing. So Black Reconstruction by W.E.B. Du Bois and Autobiography of W.E.B. Du Bois, that's what I would recommend. For William Z. Foster, Toward Soviet America, which is a very well-written book that he wrote for the 1932 elections. You can read the one that I brought out and waved at everyone earlier, The Twilight of World Capitalism. That's a good one. You can read his history volumes, The History of the Three Internationals. I always recommend that to people. So there you go. Universal basic income. Well, I'm not opposed to that. I think people having a basic income is a good thing. I have some concerns about some of the various models that have been proposed. Like there have been a lot of libertarians who've proposed universal basic income as an austerity program. They say, oh, okay, well, we're going to get universal basic income, and then we're going to get rid of food stamps, and we're going to get rid of unemployment insurance, and we just get everyone a bank transaction. And that way we can fire all these government employees whose job it is to to administer, unemployment insurance or social security or food stamps. And they see it as austerity. Basically, they say, okay, fine. I guess we have to give people stuff. We can't just not give everyone thing, which is what we really want because we're libertarians. Okay, let's just have everyone get a bank transaction, $1,000 a month, and nothing else. Right, and I see that as potentially dangerous. If it's an austerity program, I see it as potentially dangerous because number one, you're getting rid of all those good-paying government jobs, right? So that's people who made decent salaries and wages, and all of a sudden they're not employed by the state anymore. That's all kinds of money that goes out of the public out of the public budget. Those people have made a lot more than $1,000 a month. And then on top of that, the other thing that it's concerned me about. So then, if you get rid of food stamps, right? If you get rid of all the social programs, and everyone just gets a deposit of $1,000 a month, all it takes is somebody to come forward and say, "Hey, what about pedophiles?" Right? They molest little kids. When a pedophile gets out of jail, why should we give pedophiles $1,000? And immediately, a lot of people are going to go, yeah, right. Why should a pedophile get $1,000? Right? He molested some little kid or something, right? I'm not going to give him, I'm not going to, and so they pass a law. Okay, any convicted pedophile, you get out of jail, you don't get $1,000. Well, okay. I mean, but then they also don't get food stamps. They also don't get Social Security, and they also don't, get anything. Okay, that's a little scary. So now you've got thousands of pedophiles walking around who get nothing, nothing, right? That's a little bit dangerous. Oh, okay. And then they say, all right, well, why stop at pedophiles, right? What about rapists, right? Maybe they rape adults, not little kids. Why should a rapist, when a rapist gets out of jail, should we give rapists, should we give them, $1,000 a month? Okay, we add them to, pretty soon, right? Pretty soon, not only you've gotten rid of all the social programs, number one. Now you just have universal basic income. And then you can just start checking off lists of undesirable people who get nothing. And pretty soon you got crowds and crowds of starving, hungry, desperately poor people who have nothing. You have like a lumpen element that is outside that has absolutely nothing. No food stamps, no Social Security, no nothing, right? I mean, nothing. Okay, and you have an element of like there's going to be thousands of people that have nothing, right? And that is whenever you have that, when you have thousands of people who have nothing, that is the basis for some kind of fascist state at that point, right? Because those people are going to go out and be used to terrorize society, and that's a very dangerous situation. But not everyone who proposes UBI proposes universal basic income as an austerity program. There's a lot of people who advocate universal basic income who don't see it as an alternative to food. They want to keep food stamps. They want to keep Social Security. Plus, everyone gets $1,000. That's pretty decent, right? I think that'd be really great. And it would be a great stimulus on the economy, I think. It'd be very good for the economy. If we had UBI and we kept the welfare state, that would be a very good thing. I think that would be great. So UBI, there's many different angles on it. There's some who see it as an austerity program. There's some who see it almost as socialism, right? Who see it as almost like it's just a government subsidy of the economy. So if you kept the welfare state and added UBI, I would be for it. If you introduce UBI as an alternative to the welfare state, I oppose it. All right. Uyghur genocide claims. Well, look, and thank you, Neil, for the super chat. And I have been very critical of the narrative that U.S. media puts out about that. I've been very, very critical of that, right? That there are a lot of things that don't match what we're being told. For example, the Chinese government builds mosques, right? I've seen so many things about the Uyghur stuff that are not, for example, they claim Islam is being outlawed. No, the Chinese government is actively building and paying for the construction of mosques all over the Uyghur region. So they're not outlawing Islam. They're actually doing the opposite. They're building They're building mosques. Now, people say, well, they're not real mosques. They're just communists pretending to be Muslims. Well, look, I'm not in a position to tell anyone who's a real Muslim or not, but it's like, oh, they're fake. Oh, sorry. Stuff like that. I mean, look, and that, the life expectancy in the Uyghur regions has increased. Living standards are going up. But they have a big problem. And part of the problem is that China is kind of playing catch up. Because if you look at some of what's going on, China has actually, up until recently, they were teaching pan-Turkism in a lot of the schools in the Uyghur regions. And that these Uyghur separatist elements that are against the Chinese government have really embedded themselves among the population. They've really embedded themselves. What's this? If you haven't already, you might want to talk about a YouTuber named Shenzhen, China, called Daniel Debril, pushbacking. Oh, yeah, that sounds like a great guy. I'll have to check him out, Neil. That sounds like a really great guy, and thank you very much. There are, these separatist elements that are pushing this narrative that says that the people in the Uyghur regions are not Chinese, that the Chinese government is their enemy, have really made inroads among the population. And the Chinese government, that has led to security concerns with knife attacks and terrorism and stuff. And so the Chinese government has cracked down on some of that. Now, I mean, is it possible they've cracked down in ways that are not good? Possibly, and I'm not going to sit there and tell you that everything that they've done is necessarily excellent. But at the same time, right, we shouldn't, these alarmist, crazy claims, oh my God, oh my, slow down with that, right? And there's so many things that have been debunked. There have been so many videos that have come out. And I saw a video where it was an older Chinese woman and she's drinking, well, I see that. I see what you're saying about, there you go. But, I've seen videos where there's a Uyghur woman is drinking alcohol, all right? And she's clearly, like, kind of enjoying herself. She's having a shot. But the video is shown as, like, Chinese government forces Uyghur woman to drink alcohol. And it's being, like, sent to Muslims all over the world. And it's like, no, I mean, she's an older lady and she's having a shot. That's not the same thing. They have videos from, like, the Philippines and videos from Indonesia. And they say it's the videos of the Chinese government, oppressing Uyghurs and stuff. So it's like, again, is it possible the Chinese government is doing things that are not good? Of course. Is the Chinese government, murdering millions of people? And, I mean... Look, I mean, I've retweeted and shared videos where it's like you look for the sources, right? The sources tend to be U.S. government, not credible. It tends to be this guy, this weirdo named Adrian Zenz, who's definitely not credible. The more you look into this, there's not, the sources that are coming forward and making these claims are less than credible. All right. And again, this is, we will know. Okay. Right. When the Holocaust was happening in Germany, there were rumors about it, and some people knew about it, and some people went to the Catholic Church and tried to get the Catholic Church to raise the alarm, and they refused. And there were people in the United States who knew about it and were trying to raise the alarm, and they were kind of ignored. And, but now, many, many years later, we look back at Germany, and we all know the Holocaust was happening. There's no question about it. Well, but right now, there's a situation in China where there's concerns being raised. There are people who've looked into it and said these concerns may not be correct. There's other people who've looked into it and said, oh, no, these concerns are correct. There's dispute. This is different, right? And the fact that Vosh, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence is what someone's tweeted, put in the super chat there. Look, the thing is that you can't equate questioning a U.S. media narrative about something that's happening right now with Holocaust denial. That you cannot make that equivocation. That is such an utter disgusting thing. U.S. media is making claims about something that's happening now, and there is dispute among international voices about whether those claims are credible or not. Okay? That's fair. There is no dispute about what happened 70 years ago. Okay? And so it's like, no, I don't trust U.S. media. U.S. media lies. They told us that Gaddafi was handing out Viagra pills to his soldiers so he could rape women. That turned out to be a big, fat, ugly lie. And it killed millions of Libyans, and it destroyed Libya. They told us, what else have they told us? Let's go over every weapons of mass destruction. The Spain, they sunk the Maine in the harbor in Cuba. They sunk an American ship, and now we know, the Gulf of Tonkin. How many lies have they told us? So this is healthy. Questioning what the U.S. media tells us is healthy. And the fact that there is this attempt to equate anyone who questions what is being alleged against the Chinese government with Nazis is reprehensible. I don't believe that, I don't believe the over the top allegations against China. That doesn't mean I don't believe that China's doing possibly things that are bad, but I also know that there's a lot more to it. And I see a lot of claims being made by people pushing the Uyghur narrative that are clearly false, like Islam is outlawed, like elderly women's being forced to drink alcohol, like, I mean, there are many false things being said, and there's many things that we don't know about. So again, I just urge people to again, I mean, how many times have they beat this drum? And I mean, there you go. So okay. The end of history ended, and the liberals see the bourgeoisie as still progressive. Well, the end of history, that was a phrase that was invented. It was, who was it who said the end of history? That was Francis Fukuyama, who was an intellectual who argued that that capitalism was the last system. And all of that, and clearly, capitalism still has new problems and contradictions, so it's not the end of history. And that, yeah, I mean, there's always been a current of kind of social democrats who view the Western capitalist countries as progressive in relation to the developing world. Okay, we got to get through this, so I gotta keep going. We've been on here a while. So David Harvey and his lectures on capital. I have listened to some of those. I listened to them a long time ago. It was around 2008, 2009, 2010. Those were very popular. They were online. You could listen to them on iTunes and such. And he talks about capital from many different angles, from like the angles of different academic fields. And he comes at capital. He's been teaching capital for years, right? He's been giving that course for many, many years. And he comes at it from very, very many different angles. David Harvey, his History of Neoliberalism is also a very good book I would recommend. All right. Is China imperialist? Well, the thing you have to remember is that imperialism is about holding back economic development. That's what it is. Imperialism is about holding back economic development. It's going to developing countries and destroying their economy and forcing them to be impoverished captive markets that buy their products from the West, right? That's what imperialism is. Imperialism is the British Empire going to India and burning the textile mills. Imperialism is NAFTA going to Mexico, a country that's been growing their own food for thousands of years, putting all the domestic farmers out of business so they have to import their food from the United States. Imperialism is about destroying the domestic economy in order to ensure the dominance of Western countries. What China does in the developing world is not imperialism. They go into developing countries, they build infrastructure, they stimulate the domestic economy. The domestic economy gets stronger, the businesses in that country flourish, and so if it was imperialism, they would go there and put all the local businesses out and keep the country as a captive market. China doesn't do that. It goes to the country and builds up the domestic economy. The domestic economy gets stronger. Local businesses get bigger. I mean, it tends to have the opposite effect. It's not keeping these countries underdeveloped as captive markets. It's rather going there and building up these countries and developing them. It's a completely different relationship. Are there examples of Chinese companies not doing good things? Sure, I'm sure you can come up with many examples of a Chinese company that did this or that. But at the end of the day, the ultimate impact on the country, right? Look at Mexico as a result of NAFTA. Look at Libya since the United States overthrew the government of Gaddafi. Look at Nigeria, where U.S. oil companies run Nigeria. That's not the impact that China has in these countries. That's just not how their relationship works. They go there and they develop these countries. They build them up, and that's not imperialism, right? And imperialism is about holding back development. All right, someone said that psychedelic drugs are not for everyone. Yeah. I mean, psychedelic drugs are very dangerous, my friend. There's a lot of people who use them once or twice, and there's a lot of people who use them and are able to not have a problem. But there's a lot of people who use them and have had problems over the years. So, I mean, I guess there are some experimental treatments now going on, or they're arguing that people who have PTSD or other psychological ills, that they can benefit from being treated with LSD. And it's like, okay, that's possible. I don't deny that that's possible. I don't deny that that's possible, but it's a risk, you know what I mean? And that's something you should do in consultation with a physician. If you're going to engage in psychedelic treatments, you should have, a doctor who prescribes it to you. You should have a professional therapist you work with. You don't just go and take drugs on the street because, oh, you heard on TV that it's good for you, right? And that there are many people, I've done stories about this. There are a lot of questions people have about these treatments, and it's weird that they're giving them so much advertising in the U.S. press. Um, and that, I'm skeptical, honestly. When I was a teenager, I never used psychedelics, but I read all about them. I thought they were cool, scared the crap out of my parents. But, I'm at the point where everything I've read about MK Ultra and CIA experiments and all that, I have a negative perception of a lot of that stuff. I'll just be real with you, right? I've never done it, and I tend to view it in a negative light with the knowledge that I now have. So there you go. What about people that are pro-life, meaning they oppose abortion and they're war supporters? Yeah, I mean, there you go. I mean, the pro-life thing has always been a little bit weird. I mean, the thing is that among working class people in general, and especially among people from oppressed nationalities, some of the pro-life stuff makes a lot of sense. Puerto Rican women had their tubes tied, and they very much tried to wipe out Puerto Rican women at one point. And so because of that, there's many Puerto Rican folks who feel like abortion is synonymous with genocide and that they should work hard to have children because the government and because the white man has been trying to wipe them out for so long. And there's people in the black community that feel the same way. They feel like, look, the abortion clinics are in our neighborhoods and the white man has been trying to wipe us out for so long, and it's our responsibility to have children because we don't, and that is different, okay? But the modern pro-life movement that started in the late 70s, which is part of the religious right, has always struck me as very, very weird. And it's not like this working class response to, depopulation and Malthusianism from the ruling class. It's not that at all. There's always that. There's always going to be some kind of anti-abortion, anti-birth control sentiment among the working class because of Malthusianism, because, having a family is a very rewarding thing for many people, because of, austerity, and it becomes economically harder to have children. And the working class is going to feel like the ruling class is trying to reduce our numbers, and we need to resist that. So that there's going to be some basic anti-abortion sentiments among the working class, and especially among oppressed nationalities. That's always going to be there. That's not what the modern pro-life movement is. Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, that stuff, the modern religious right, it is one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. And they're religious fanatics, and that's really all it is. I mean, they're religious fanatics. Um, they're religious fanatics, and this is an expression of their religious fanaticism. And they don't care about people being bombed, and they don't care about social programs, but babies are being killed. And I don't know. I mean, I remember during the summer that Obama got elected, I was, in Michigan, and I was going to a lot of the Obama rallies. There would be anti-abortion protesters out there, and I would argue with them sometimes. And sometimes there was an oddly anti-woman tone to some of it. Some of them were like middle-aged guys who'd been divorced, and it was like they weren't just saying that abortion was wrong. They were saying that they didn't like women. It was like women are out of control. Women are not obeying their husbands. Women, there was some of that, right? I mean, that's not all of, the pro-life movement by any means, but there was that, okay? And the same when people would protest, there's gay pride parades. There's always like an anti-gay pride parade. Again, some of those folks are just very religious, fanatic folks who religion is like the center of their life and all that. But sometimes some of those folks, there was a guy, middle-aged guy, I remember, was at Cleveland. In Cleveland, they would have the gay pride parade, and there'd always be anti-gay pride parade protesters, like these religious right-wing people that would protest the pride parade. Remember, one of them was this middle-aged guy who kept walking up to lesbians and saying, why did you turn your back on Christ? Why did you, and it's like, it was clear he was not yelling at men who were gay. He was yelling at women, and there's some kind of weird, and I bet you anything that guy was divorced, and he had some kind of anger at women. There was some misogyny going on there. And sometimes you see that with these, again, most people that are religious fundamentalists, most people that are on the right, most people that are anti-abortion and gay marriage, it's not like that. But among the ones that actually go out and protest it and make it their obsession, it's personal and it's related to their marriage falling apart, or they didn't get access to their children. They feel like they were not granted custody of their children, and that the woman has ruined their life or something like that. And it's almost like they're dealing with some personal rage that they have at women or something like that. And that's a little bit bizarre. And I mean, the pro-life stuff, largely, I mean, again, it is religious fanaticism, and it is just, they're fanatical about that. They're fanatical about gay marriage. They're fanatical about prayer in school. They're fanatical about whatever the religious right is fanatical about. You can talk about the roots of the religious right. I've done whole videos, the origins of the modern religious right. Where did it come from? And and so I don't want to go into all of that there, but I've dealt with these people before, and again, it's more complicated. All right, I don't know if the Ottoman Empire was Atlanticist. I know very little about the Ottoman Empire, so I just can't answer your question. I really just don't know very much about the Ottoman Empire. I apologize. Are the DPRK defectors paid to make stuff up? Well, I wouldn't put it in those words. But, do you think, imagine someone defected from the DPRK and they came to the United States and they said, wow, Kim Jong-un is amazing. The economy there is amazing. It's an awesome place. You should really go there. I mean, I defected. I didn't get along and I'm really much happier here. But DPRK is amazing. Do you think they would get on CNN? Do you think CNN would put them on? All right. MSM hates Joe Rogan. Do you think MSM? Yeah, do you think Fox News would have big segments with that? If someone defected from North Korea and was like, it wasn't that bad. Do you think they would put them on there? I mean, come on. And it's not just like this for the ones who go on TV, but it's like this for all the kind of people who from Cuba, from Eastern Europe. Americans don't want to hear you say good things about communist countries. So when you come to the United States from wherever you came from, if you walk around saying good things about communism, you're not going to be popular. People are going to look at you weird. And you're already being looked at weird because you're a foreigner, right? And then on top of that, just icing on the cake, on top of that, right? When you come here to the United States, you're required, one of the questions on your citizenship form, are you a member of the Communist Party? You can't get your U.S. citizenship if you're a communist. So, the chances of someone coming here to the United States and being like, you know what, I'm a communist, I lived under it, it was good, are quite slim, because there's going to be social pressure for you to not act that way, number one. Number two, if you act that way, people aren't going to gather around you and want to hear your stories, because that will contradict the political narrative they have. Number three, on your citizen, you're risking being deported at that point. And there are immigrant communists in the United States. There are certain immigrant communities that have people that are communists. And there are Cuban Americans who like Fidel Castro. They're not the majority. They're a very small minority. There are many Chinese Americans who support the Chinese government. Not the majority. Or they might. I mean, it's not clear, actually. I don't even know how the majority of the Chinese community feels. Falun Gong certainly doesn't represent all Chinese Americans by any means. So, and I mean, you again, with North Korea, right? So there are these particular defectors who we see on CNN, and again, would these people have left if they were getting along with it? I mean, again, during the U.S. Civil War, there were people who thought the South was right, and they thought the war was awful. And if you interviewed Scarlett O'Hara about Abraham Lincoln, she would tell you that he was awful. That's her perspective. Would Scarlett O'Hara be lying when she said, I do declare that Abraham Lincoln destroyed Alabama? It was no, she wouldn't be lying. That's what she thought. That's her perception. But the enslaved person might have a different perspective, right? And that when you listen to someone from a socialist country, you're not getting everyone from that country's perspective. You're getting that person's perspective, okay? And they wouldn't have left if they liked it, number one, and they wouldn't have come here if they were not already kind of an anti-communist. So that's what you have to remember when you talk to them. And it's that simple, and that there are two sides to every story. There are atrocities in wars on both sides, generally, when there's ugly wars. But in every formerly socialist country of Eastern Europe, Russia, Lithuania, Estonia, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Poland, every one of the former Eastern Bloc countries, poll after poll after poll after poll shows that people said life was better. People say life was better. Soviet nostalgia is very high. The nostalgia for communism is very high. And those people lived under it. And in fact, when I was in Russia, when I was covering the campaign of the Communist Party, I asked people who votes for the Communist Party. And you know what they said? They said old people, pensioners, retired people, the ones who actually lived under it. But they lived under it. I am so tired. One of the most infuriating questions I've ever been asked. People say, oh, haven't you ever talked to anyone who ever lived in a communist country? Poll after poll. In Russia, the people who vote for the Communist Party are the ones who actually lived under it. Poll after poll after poll after poll. And every former, it's this arrogance. Everyone assumes that, so there you go. There you go. The infinite growth thing, look, I've said many times, human beings are constantly reinventing the way they interact with their environment, right? What would a caveman do with oil? Nothing, right? There are minerals in Africa right now that were worthless 20, 30 years ago that are now very valuable because they're used in computer chips, right? We have gone from space travel. We've gone from hunter-gatherer civilization. Thank you, Mike. And I'll look into their work. I trust them. Ben Norton and Max Blumenthal are great folks, so we'll have to look into their work. But, space travel and iPhones, that's where we're at now. Just 5,000-6,000 years ago, we were hunter-gatherers. Beavers have been building their beaver dams the same way for millions of years. Ants have been building their ant farms the same way for millions of years. But human beings are, by nature, constantly reinventing and changing the nature of their interaction with their environment. And this is a definitive aspect of humanity. Human beings are constantly reinventing themselves. The first ecological crisis we had was when hunter-gatherer civilization came to an end. We couldn't keep hunting and gathering. There was a scarcity. We were too good at it. So we reinvented our relationship. We started growing crops, and we started domesticating animals. And that what we human beings tend to do when our way of interacting with our environment doesn't work anymore is we reinvent it. We develop different fuel sources, right? We went from burning coal to burning gasoline, right? We went from using metal or using wood to using metal, right? And that human beings are constantly changing their interaction. So while there's not infinite resources on the planet, right? First of all, we could acquire resources from another planet. That's being widely discussed. That is a serious proposal. It's being discussed in the New York Times and other places. It's not stupid science fiction that you can just laugh off, number one. Number two, who's to say we can't change the way we interact with our environment, right? Develop fusion energy, right? People talk about fuel cell technology and how, they talk about how you could use water as fuel, right? There are many different possible ways we could interact with our environment. So this is not, when people just say, we can't have infinite growth. It's just, that's limits to growth. That's Malthusianism. And that is that slow growth agenda of the ultra rich that I'm always talking about, right? That's what that is. Okay, next question. All right. DPRK solidarity with U.S. communists. Black Panthers. The North Koreans were big, huge supporters of the Black Panthers. They had parades to honor them. They welcomed delegations from the Black Panthers. Yeah, the North Koreans were, very enthusiastic supporters of the Black Panther Party. Yeah, that was probably the greatest example of solidarity with Americans, was that. They also, the North Koreans, they made a point of supporting the American Servicemen's Union. When GIs in the United States were unionized into in the military during the Vietnam War, there was an effort to unionize the Army. And the leader of it was a guy named Andy Stapp, who I met on a number of occasions, a very nice man. He died. They gave him an obituary in the New York Times, a member of the Workers' World Party. And the North Koreans made a point of supporting the American Servicemen's Union. They welcomed Andy Stapp, and they actually let him broadcast messages from North Korea to over the barricades, over the over the border, at the 38th parallel, to the U.S. troops. And so, these U.S. troops are guarding the parallel, the border with North Korea. And suddenly they heard the voice of Andy Stapp, American communist, talking at them on speakers. North Korea supported American soldiers who didn't want to fight in the Vietnam War. That was something that they did. There's other examples, but I think the most blatant example of North Korea supporting American communists would be the support they gave to the Black Panthers, number one, and the support they gave to the American Servicemen's Union, Andy Stapp, and to GIs, American soldiers who didn't want to fight in the Vietnam War. Alrighty. All right. Why is George Soros freaked out by President Xi? Because George Soros doesn't believe in economic growth. He thinks there are too many human beings on the planet Earth, and he wants to reduce the human population, and he's an advocate of the open society. He wants weak, pathetic governments that Wall Street can just roll over, and China is the opposite of that. They're raising living standards. They're raising people out of poverty. They're increasing their population. They're building a more prosperous life for their population. And to add to that, they have created a strong government that can stand up to multinational corporations and fight for its people. They have a government of action in China. So everything that George Soros is against, the Chinese government is. So of course he's freaked out by Xi. Right? He wants an open society. He wants a government that just kind of sits back and lets Wall Street do whatever it wants. That's what George Soros is all about. And George Soros was a big part of transitioning as the Cold War was ending. He overthrew various communist governments, but he also helped, roll back a lot of the military juntas in Latin America, a lot of the authoritarian military regimes the USA had tolerated as a barrier and a bulwark against communism during the Cold War. He had rolled them back, right? And that, Pinochet was removed from power in Chile, and that throughout Latin America, throughout Africa, and many places, they realized that in order to implement economic austerity, it's better to have a democratic, in quotes, government, an open society, than it is to have a military junta. Those military strongmen, in order to stay in power, they have to hand out the goods. They have to take care of people. They have to have a layer of society that benefits from them. A great example of that is the dictator Park Chung-hee. Park Chung-hee is a brutal, awful dictator, right? Awful human being. Mass murderer, had concentration camps for orphan children. A brutal, awful human being. But in order to stay in power, Park Chung-hee had to create a middle class in South Korea, and he did that. And that's why he had to stay in power. That's how he needed that. If you're going to have a brutal authoritarian military dictatorship, there has to be a layer of the population that benefits from it, or else it doesn't work, or else the population overthrows you. Park Chung-hee, in order to do all the evil things he did, he had to create POSCO, the state-run steel industry in China. He had to, raise living standards in the urban centers of South Korea, right? And that's what George Soros doesn't want, right? And then an open society allows neoliberalism. I mean, Park, the military strongman, he prevented all of Korea going to socialism. He prevented socialism from spreading to South Korea. But at the same time, he engaged in economic policies that ultimately resulted in Wall Street having competitors, right? And economic development taking place in South Korea and such. And that's not what the imperialists want. They want the whole world to be poor and underdeveloped. They want austerity. They want to drive down living standards. And so, the open society, that's what George Soros, it's the Open Society Institute, right? That's what they want. They want an open society, weak governments that they can just push around. They want a dictatorship by capital, not by authoritarian Bonapartist regimes that serve capital. No, they want just a straight up dictatorship by capital. They're libertarians, more or less. All right. Irish potato famine. A lot of people immigrated to the United States. I mean, my ancestors, a lot of people immigrated to the United States because of the Irish potato famine. And they were land seizures. And many people have talked about how the laissez-faire libertarian policies of the Whig Party participated in that. And that, that was largely a man-made famine. I mean, people were dying and food was available, and the British government oversaw the death of a lot of people in order to seize the land for their allies. And it wasn't, yes, there was a blight or whatever. There was some insects that were eating the crops and stuff, but it was more than that. It was austerity. It was driving down the population. It was libertarian policies. It was land seizures. I mean, the famine in a lot of ways was a man-made famine. If it had happened in a socialist country, you bet they would have blamed socialism for it. And that's, throughout the history of capitalism. The whole reason that Marxism emerged, the whole reason that, is because everywhere free market libertarian policies have been implemented, they've resulted in mass death. The British brought free market policies to India, and it killed millions of people. The British imposed free market policies on China with their opium wars, and it killed millions of people. The British brought free market policies to Iran, and it killed millions of people. The British brought free market policy, the French imposed free market libertarian policies on South Vietnam, and it killed millions of people. I mean, everywhere the British Empire, the Western imperialists go, and they impose free market libertarianism, and they basically put all the local businesses out of business, free trade. Wherever free trade is imposed, mass death follows. In Latin America, throughout the 1990s, free trade was imposed on Latin America, and all kinds of people died. In Eastern Europe, after the fall of the Soviet Union, free trade was imposed and people died. Everywhere you implement libertarian, free trade, Adam Smith economics, people die. Okay? So this idea that, communism killed me, I mean, no one would even be interested in communism if capitalism hadn't killed so many people everywhere it had ever been implemented. So Iraqi Kurdistan. Well, look, I mean, I'm not opposed to the idea of the Kurds having their own national territory. I'm not opposed to that. But, if you look at in Syria and other places, the Kurds have kind of functioned as allies of U.S. imperialism. And so, at the same time that we need to recognize that, the Kurds, that they do have a right to their national territory. On the other hand, we need to, at the same time, talk about how the U.S. imperialists are kind of using, elements among the Kurds for their own ends. And so it's complicated. There's nuance there. Nuance. Alrighty. CPI membership. Well, look, at this point, the membership isn't really open, but you are welcome to participate in our Zoom calls. All the names that we've received so far have been added to an email list, and you should be receiving an email list inviting you to the Saturday calls. Check your spam folder. If you haven't gotten it, you can message me directly, calebmaupin@gmail.com. Love to have you involved. Why does the mainstream media hate Joe Rogan? Well, I think they hate Joe Rogan because he will interview right-wing folks, right? It's like there's the new right that they call it, Trumpers and Nigel Farage and Brexit and all, and that the mainstream of imperialism, the mainstream of the ruling class doesn't like this stuff. And because they don't like it, they consider anyone who associates with it to be like a thought criminal or something like that. And Joe Rogan, he interviewed Bernie Sanders, but he's interviewed a lot of these folks, and he's open to engaging with people on the right, just like I am, just like anyone should be, right? If we want to get out of this crisis, we need to challenge the liberal order, and we need to speak with people who oppose the liberal order, but we need to bring them Marxism. We don't need to agree with the right-wing message. We need to bring them Marxism. Joe Rogan is somebody who is open to engaging with the right, but he's not a leftist. I mean, he's got his own views. He's not on the left. I wouldn't put him on the left. Joe Rogan is Joe Rogan. I mean, he's a successful podcaster. He's quite right-wing himself on a number of issues. But because, in many ways, he has talked with people on the right, and he promotes certain, things that are popular on the right. Because of that, he's considered to be, an outlier, right? And I don't agree. A lot of the stuff that he gets called out for, I don't think he should be censored, but I would agree is not good. I'm not a libertarian. I think libertarianism is a destructive economic philosophy. I'm not in favor of psychedelic drugs, as I said before. You can go down the line. I think he's more open to the vaccine stuff. I don't question the vaccine. I don't think there's an issue with the vaccine. But that said, he's against, to some degree or other, the liberal order. And so the liberal order mobilizes its followers to shut him down. And our job as leftists is not to defend the liberal order from Joe Rogan. Our job as leftists is to go to people who might listen to Joe Rogan and say, hey, the problem is capitalism, and give them our alternative to the liberal order. That's my message. All right, and on that note, folks, I am exhausted. It's been a late night. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And yes, I did answer your CPI question. I answered that. Yeah, we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Fusion City now. Fusion City now. Good night.